is firing a 41 gun salute here in Hyde Park today, the Monday immediately following it. So what we've just seen or just missed is the 71 horses pulling 6 First World War era 13-pounder field guns over the grass, and they have quickly been placed into the position ready for this gun salute. The guns have been detached, the horses have been escorted to a safe area, and at exactly midday the 41 gun salute will happen, marking the 2nd anniversary of His Majesty King Charles III's accession to the throne. Now, the King Street Royal Horse Artillery are well practiced in the ceremonial gun salutes. It was them this time 2 years ago that fired the death gun salutes, marking the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. But we also have a very special accompaniment to the gun salutes here today in Hyde Park. If we can just pan to the right here, we have the Welsh Guards, the band of the Welsh Guards who are going to be accompanying the gun salute here. They have just returned from Arras in northern France, where they were given the freedom of the city of Arras, marking the 80th anniversary of the Welsh Guards liberating that city from Nazi Germany. So they are expected to be playing during this gun salutes, which will be taking place, as I say, at midday. 21 gun salutes is the tradition, but because it is in a royal park, that is Hyde Park, an extra 20 guns have been added to the firing of that. But elsewhere at 1 o'clock, we're expecting another big gun salute, 62 of them, and that's happening at the Tower of London. The Honourable Artillery Company will be doing that. And it is tradition, it's the pomp and ceremony of the British military, a special celebration of the military to the head of the armed forces, King Charles III. It happens every year. Crowds have gathered in Hyde Park on both sides of the safe zone. Media have also gathered here as well. So it is going to be incredibly loud, as perhaps you would expect. Just a couple minutes to go, Tom and Emily.
It is, of course, a momentous occasion. This is what Britain does well. This is what the royal family is all about. The institutions that our country is built upon, the traditions, these gun salutes going back to the 15th century, I've been reading this morning. Originally, ships that were coming into port would fire blanks out of their cannon to show that they came in peace and that they weren't bristling with loaded weaponry, and that became the sort of ceremony that we have continued for centuries in this country. Let's listen in, as it looks like there is action.
So the gunners here, they're wearing their full distinctive dress uniform, which includes gold braided jackets and Busby hats. The guns are the regiment's colours, actually. That's kind of equivalent to the infantry regiment's ceremonial flag with battle honours, which we are well versed to, with each trooping the colour every year in June to mark the King's official birthday. And so these guns, these 13-pounder World War II era guns, World War I era guns, are afforded due respect throughout the route here. We are just a minute or so to go, a few seconds away from that first gun being fired by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. The flag has just been raised.
Now, the 21 gun salute comes from the idea that 3 guns would be fired onshore for every gun that would be fired by a ship. 7 cannon on the ship fired, 3 for each, making 21 on land. But of course, as Cameron, you were saying, a royal park adds 20, making this a 41 gun salute that will be starting precisely at midday today, marking 2 years since the official accession of King Charles to the throne. A day, of course, of celebration of a new king, but also a twinge of sadness to mark the passing of the late Queen as well. Let's listen in.
For those of you just joining us, you are watching and listening to the live scene here in Hyde Park in central London, a special military celebration marking the second anniversary of the accession to the throne of His Majesty King Charles III. This is the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, the British Army mounted ceremonial unit that fires royal salutes on royal anniversaries and state occasions such as state visits and, of course, royal birthdays. But today is all about the accession of King Charles III and also, very sadly, the 2-year anniversary since the passing of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Now, a team of black horses pulled these gun carriages, the gun carriages to this particular position in Hyde Park. Black horses, they're permanently based in Woolwich, the King's Troop soldiers, famous throughout the world really for their ceremonial excellence, and they of course also serve operationally throughout their careers in the Royal Artillery. But these guns just used for ceremonial purposes. World War I era 13-pounder guns here. They started firing this 41 gun salute at exactly midday. The tradition is 21 guns, all, as Tom was saying earlier, dating back to ships that they were friendly firing as they came into a friendly port from the sea. But because we're in a royal park, 20 more guns shots have been added. Of course, they are firing blanks here at this particular situation, and it is very much a tradition here every year, every especially day, that these guns will fire. The King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery in full military dress uniform. The last time they fired these guns, I believe, was earlier this summer for the Trooping of the Colour, the King's official birthday. That was fired in Green Park rather than Hyde Park. As I say, full military dress, the regimental colours, distinctive dress uniform included their gold-braided jackets and Busby hats. At the end of this 41 gun salute, at 1 o'clock, a similar gun salute will take place at the Tower of London, His Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress. That will be the Honourable Artillery Company. 62 guns that time, 21 for the tradition, another 20 because it's a royal palace, and another 21 because the gun salute is taking place in the City of London. Now, accompanying this royal gun salute, marking the accession, the 2-year anniversary of King Charles III taking the throne, the band of the Welsh Guards have been playing music ahead of this gun salute. So they've just returned from Arras, the northern French city, where they were given the freedom of the city, marking the 80th anniversary of the Welsh Guards liberating that French city from the Nazis in 1945.
Well, Cameron, thank you so much for bringing us that live from Hyde Park, the 41 gun salute to mark the accession of the King.
Thank you very much indeed. That was Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent. Now we're going to turn to domestic politics because the Prime Minister, he could be facing a bit of a rebellion over the government's plans to cut winter fuel payments, with reports as many as 50 Labour MPs could refuse to back the policy.
Well, even his own Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, admitted he's not remotely happy about having to take money away from pensioners, particularly as fuel prices are rising this winter. But even Wes Streeting insisted that this was a necessary move.
Yes, well, MPs will have their chance to vote on plans to scrap winter fuel payments for pensioners tomorrow.
Joining us now, I'm delighted to say, is GB News' very own Alistair Stewart. Alistair, this is a big test for the incoming government.
It's a huge test, and I think at the heart of it is the fundamental differences between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. And the Conservative Party obviously are looking at their hearts and souls, deciding who is going to be the new leader. Because we heard Starmer on BBC and on news bulletins make the point at the weekend that if you are on the additional allowance of the pensioner credit, then, of course, although the means test kicks in, you will still get the winter fuel allowance. Fact of the matter is that if you, like many people, including my good self, when you were working full time, put a bit aside, built up some savings for a rainy day, or are still trying to work, even now in retirement every now and then, you very, very quickly hit the ceiling, which means you can't get that pensioner credit. So it means that you cannot get the winter fuel allowance, because I think at its heart, Labour believes the state knows best and the state will look after people that really need it. And if you stand on your own 2 feet and try and look after yourself, you're on your own, sunshine. And that's where I am, and thousands of others as well. We also see the Unite Union, the biggest trade union, kicking in and telling Starmer exactly what they want as well. And that's reminiscent of the old day when I was an industrial correspondent, and the Transport and General Workers Union that became Unite, and the engineers used to go into Downing Street and tell Labour prime ministers exactly what they wanted. And 9 times out of 10, they'd get it. I don't think Unite are going to get their way this time on the winter fuel allowance, but I think it's an outrage, but I think it's much deeper than just a few quid.
It's very interesting to watch what's going on here. Why do you suspect he's expending so much political capital on this issue, which isn't going to save the government all that much money in the grand scheme of things?
Because historically, Labour's greatest single weakness in nearly all of the opinion polls has been economic credibility. Do the voters, however big a majority they gave to Sir Keir Starmer and his party not that long ago, and there he is with Rachel Reeves, his Chancellor, sitting there on his left, and on his right, Anthony Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister. A lot of people still don't think that when push comes to shove, the Labour Party can be trusted with the economy. So I think what Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are both saying in perfect harmony is, yes, you can trust us with the economy. We are prepared to take even really tough decisions at the expense of pensioners to show that we will do the right thing to try and balance the books. Of course, that's complete nonsense, because they'll get nowhere near balancing the books, because the national debt is trillions and trillions of pounds. What it does mean is that many people will lose out a small amount of money for the sake of political capital.
And Alistair, the bizarre thing about this all is, of course, this is at the same time that the government is spending more money on wage rises, above inflation pay increases for many people, train drivers, doctors, all the rest of it. But it's interesting listening to what some people in the Labour Party are saying. Rachel Maskell, the Labour MP for York Central, has said that people will die as a result of this change of policy. She says that being cold leads to an increased likelihood of strokes, heart attacks, hypothermia, pneumonia, and is saying that she won't back this policy. Do you think that there'll be a serious rebellion from Labour's own ranks on this?
Yes, I think there could be, because it's. I'm not knocking Rachel at all. I think she's an honourable person, and I think the point that she makes is perfectly reasonable, and many doctors would agree with that. But I think what you'll see is a parade of Labour MPs wearing their hearts on their sleeves, because, frankly, this lot that you're looking at the moment, Prime Minister, Chancellor and Chief Secretary, are trying to find a way that will allow those rebels like Rachel to abstain rather than actually vote against, because they won't want the full embarrassment of a total rebellion.
Alistair, what does this all tell us about the man in number 10? He's chosen to take this on. This is quite a big battle right at the start of his premiership. Lots of people are talking and commentating, saying that he comes across as extremely miserable. He doesn't seem to have a vision for hope nor change anymore, which he did in the run-up to the election. How is he playing this, in your view?
I read Dan Hodges, one of the long-term Labour supporters, who then turned into a Labour critic, who said he's playing it quite well, in the sense he's trying to show that he's all of those things that many people said that he wasn't, i.e. he's tough, he's prepared to take on his enemies even if they are within his own party. And I think going into the Rose Garden as saying, look, things are going to get worse before they get any better, was a statement of the blindingly obvious. What I don't think will last for very long is for him to just keep blaming the Conservative Party for everything that's wrong. The Institute of Fiscal Studies, who I would trust with my credit card and my checkbook, because they're honourable men and women there, said you can expect Labour to blame the state of the books when they take over, and it's all dreadful, and it's nonsense, because actually Sue Gray and the leadership of the Labour Party have known for months and months what the real state of the public finances are. And so to say they suddenly found a £20 billion black hole, I think is complete nonsense. As I said at the beginning, I think that Keir Starmer is risking a lot within his own party to prove to the electorate that he can be trusted with the economy, even when it comes to taking tough decisions. What I think it also shows is that they don't like people who stand on their own 2 feet, and they don't like wealth creators. So watch the budget, but an increase in capital gains tax.
I think that's a wise watchword there. Of course, we're expecting many different tax rises, potentially those that go against maybe not the letter, but certainly the spirit of Rachel Reeves's election promise to not raise taxes on working people. I'm thinking about what VAT exemptions might be abolished, whether fuel duty will rise, all of these different taxes that aren't the 3 main taxes they promised to freeze, but are all of the taxes around those, not the central ones, but every other tax you can think of that could well be going up as soon as October.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also, what I hate is this kind of playing with words. You know, we won't increase taxes on working people. But if you're a pensioner like me and you're retired, and you earn more than £200 or £300 a week, 200 as an individual, 300 as a couple, then you do get taxed, and that tax is in the form of losing the winter fuel allowance. So be warned, if you want to work hard even when you're retired, Labour don't like it.
Goodness me.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Alistair Stewart. Always fantastic to get your take on these things. GB News' very own Alistair Stewart. What do you make of it all? I was reading that Charlie Mullins is going to sell up his £12 million property in London and put all his money into Dubai and Spain instead. I mean, it's depressing if true.
Well, we are seeing an exodus of millionaires, more than any other country in this part of the world, matching the sort of scale of millionaire exodus that India is experiencing and China is experiencing. But perhaps we need to look to the countries that are having net import of millionaires and seeing what they're doing, because is it better or worse to have more millionaires in your economy? I think there are many in the Labour Party. There are many Labour MPs who have actually said that every billionaire is a policy failure, as if they don't want rich people in their country. Well, if there are no rich people in the country, taxes are much, much higher on the people who aren't rich to then fund everything.
You see people saying, you know, when someone tweets or notes that millionaires are leaving and that this might be bad for the taxpayer in the long run, you know, some people on the left, bye then, cheerio, we don't need you. OK, well, then you're just going to have to be taxed more.
Yeah, I mean, it's the top 1% that pays for about 25% of income tax. Where are you going to get that quarter of all income tax receipts if the top 1% leave? Yeah,
it's not going to be very helpful, is it? And you might say, oh, well, let's just tax wealth more and more, you know, quick fix to our ailing NHS. But you only have to look at other countries that tried it to see that it wasn't awfully successful.
It was
in fact, quite the opposite.
Boris Johnson's favourite anecdote as Mayor of London was that he was the mayor of the 4th largest French city on the planet. Why? Because all the French millionaires left under François Hollande, under that disastrous presidency, and moved to London instead.
Yeah, well, maybe it's not that popular to say we need to win back millionaires, but it's quite practical, though. I don't want to be taxed more. Most people don't want to be taxed more, apart from the patriotic millionaires. That's the group that wants to be taxed more, believe it or not.
But they could always, you know, write a cheque. HMRC, I hear.
Maybe a bank transfer, even.
Yeah. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Now, coming up, a senior Met officer admits that mistakes were made in the policing of pro-Palestine protests.
Just a few.
More on that after this.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Stay-at-home dads, good or bad?
I personally think when you just have a baby, your hormones are all over the place, you're breastfeeding, to go back to work, I feel personally, it's a big old thing. And I think babies really need their mums. On the other side, if a stay-at-home dad was a stay-at-home dad for years, I would also say, well, come on now, the children are in school. What's the issue? Why can't you go back to work?
It's really interesting because my husband's been a stay-at-home dad for 6 months and is working part-time. We both work part-time now. And that was always the choice that we were going to make. And it's been the best thing ever for my family. My husband and my daughter have the most incredible bond. He's much more practical, playful, and a better problem solver than me.
I mean, the problem I see, Annette, with all of this is that you do get a lot of women who say, you know, we don't want the stereotype. We don't like the stereotypes. And when men say, well, actually, I want to be the parent staying at home and looking after the child, it's frowned upon. So you can't have it both ways.
I wouldn't say that's a long-term stay-at-home dad. And also, we're talking about actually dads should look after their children, and we shouldn't be praising them and say, oh, they're underappreciated for changing a nappy. That's their duty.
I think it takes real guts as a man to decide that you're going to give up those things that society deems so highly, even if it's for a short time.
Why is it then, Annette, that you say your dads should go back to work?
I read an article about a dad who was a stay-at-home dad for 15 years, pursuing his hobbies and fitness and all that. Now, I just don't think that's fair.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 12:19, and the Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, he's admitted the force made mistakes in its policing of pro-Palestine protests, particularly in the early stages back in October.
Well, speaking to the think tank Policy Exchange, Matt Twist cited the decision to not immediately arrest demonstrators shouting jihad as an example that the Met is not acting decisively enough during these protests.
I mean, they started getting into a public discussion about the meaning of jihad and the different interpretations.
As if shouting it on the street was an inner search for peace.
I know, crazy. Anyway, he insisted police tactics had since developed, and he strongly rejected any accusations of two-tier or differential policing.
Okay. Well, let's get the thoughts now of former police sergeant Harry Tanguy. Harry, this is a pretty stark admission from a very, very senior officer in the Met.
Yeah, it is, but I often wonder if it's the same as politicians that say, yes, we will learn from things, and things are never learned from. I think it's even bigger than the Met, unfortunately. I think it's Home Office, it's that decree these things. And even when you go all the way back to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and that side of things, the police became very sensitive through the government's direction when it involved race, culture, religion, that side of things. And I think, you know, it came from people are getting frustrated because you've got Black Lives Matter, nothing to do with Britain, you know, George Floyd, American. You've got Stop Oil, where people realises we're creating very little pollution. You've got Palestine. There's nothing to do with Great Britain. There's nothing to do, and we want our country back from these individuals. And you'll find the more extreme protesters are taking full advantage of the weaknesses in our system. And I think now we have the internet, there has got to be a better, more peaceful and less sort of destructive way of protesting, especially when it's week after week after week, and especially when it means it affects people in our country. For example, with the Palestinians, with the Jews not able to go into London feeling unsafe, etc. And I think it has to be dealt with consistently. This happened way early on when I was taught on my sergeant's interview when I went in. I knew that you don't treat people equally. You treat them according to their own particular needs, which sounds great, but it can be taken advantage of. And before you know it, multiculturalism, we thought, hey, that was the great thing. Everyone's earning loads of money from multiculturalism. And then you realize that people stayed in their communities a lot of the time and they didn't sometimes learn the language. And then they wanted their culture back into this country and it became divisive. And I think we're realizing that integration is everything. And it's a completely different thing and much easier to police if everyone is integrated and policed at the same level. And
police are on the front line. Police are on the front line, aren't they, in dealing with these issues? They see how community tensions can make policing very hard indeed. I mean, there was that extraordinary moment in Westminster. You had From the River to the Sea, which many people do find deeply offensive, projected onto the side of the House of Parliament, the Big Ben, no less, and the police were seen to do nothing.
And I think it's amplified with the Met. I mean, these rules and regulations from the Home Office and how you're meant to be treating people with threat assessments or risk assessments. And I always said as a police officer on the street, no one dictates to the police if they get arrested or not, all right? And if it gets messy and it gets dirty and untidy, then you still have to make that arrest to make a point. And so that it shows the rest of the community around that you're sticking up for what's right. And I think that's where we've slipped, especially with mainstream media picking a side very early on, which has lots of clickbait. And you've got too many politicians as leaders. The Met is amplified because the world is watching, and it's not necessarily watching somewhere like Devon and Cornwall and South Wales, etc. It's quite so much. And so these are amplified. And I think people are a bit struck, first of all, police leaders are struck. They don't know what to do initially, and they want to see how it all plays out. Well, that's too late. Let's stick to the basics, to no fear nor favour. If it's unlawful, if it's creating division and violence, then it has to be stopped there and then. This is very tricky when your resources are low and you can't arrest everyone there because you've got no one to deal with the aftermath violence. That's the problem. It's catch-22 sometimes.
Yes, and I can understand the intimidation and frankly, the problem of arresting people when there are 200 protesters perhaps looking a bit threatening and just 2 police officers. I can understand how there wouldn't be an arrest made there. But what I can't understand is police officers standing next to a projector that is projecting what many people interpret as a genocidal slogan onto our national parliament. I mean, I don't think I could imagine the French police standing by a projector projecting onto the National Assembly. That projector would be in bits on the road. I mean, it would be smashed to pieces. Or the DC Capitol Police. I can't imagine if that slogan was projected up on the Capitol building in Washington, DC, that it would last 2 minutes. Why is our police force so different?
We need strong leadership. And unfortunately, it's going to take a while to get in there because, unfortunately, you've got this, if you like, there's certain wokeism and that is brought in to think that you just hug everyone and everything will be fine. And unfortunately, you have to make some difficult decisions. Leadership needs to be there to say, right, clear that's going, arrest these individuals, this is what needs to be done. For an individual police officer to take it upon themselves to take that off, to turn that projector off and to arrest those people and then create obviously a huge melee around, then that's just not feasible for that individual because they know they're not going to get the backing of the system, of the police, of the IOPC, of the mainstream media, etc. Why should anyone throw themselves to the wolves to make a point? This is why we need proper leadership for once, not politicians in the police. And I tell you now, the front line, I was getting messages from those police officers during the Black Lives Matter when they were pinned up against the wall and you had the PSU, the public order officers around the corner waiting to be called in. They were told, no, stand by, it just might make things worse. And while their officers were getting beaten, that has to stop.
Harry, this senior Scotland Yard officer, he's rejected the accusation that there is 2-tier policing. He says that the policing of these types of protests has improved and that new tactics have developed. Do you agree with him on that?
Well, I think policing has to be seen to be done as well. If you remember the Mark Duggan 2011 riots, there's not a lot could be done at the time. The streets were left to burn, quite frankly. But then there were thousands of arrests and serious prosecutions afterwards, for about a year afterwards, wasn't it? And that sent a message. And so if that's really visible and that people are getting their comeuppance, then great. I don't think the public are seeing that right now. And they're seeing certain people and cultures, because I think this country is, the leadership in this country is so frightened of culture that they don't understand it. They don't understand it. So they don't know what is Islam, what is just culture and nothing to do with Islam. Or like, you know, for some reason, yesterday you had Pakistanis celebrating the birthday of Muhammad on the streets. Now, for Islam, that's considered blasphemous. You don't celebrate the birthday. No one knows the birthday. But for a culture, for Pakistanis, that's very different. Now, I doubt many people in the UK know that. I only know that because I'm actually, my girlfriend is from Jordan and knows just as much about Islam as she does Catholicism, because she was brought up in a Catholic convent school as well. So it's quite useful knowing the difference between culture, race and religion. And some people in this country are taking full advantage of our ignorance on that, and the police are too scared to say, no, enough. Clear the streets. That's nothing to do with religion, celebrating your you know, the times of your life and things like that. And yet in Jordan, they celebrate Christmas. There's Christmas trees there. In Saudi Arabia and things. There's so much more integration.
It's very
there.
difficult. It's very difficult for the police.
I was just going to say, I think Jordan also bans the burqa despite being a Muslim country, because there are different interpretations. Anyway, before we get into the weeds...
It's very hard for British police officers to understand all these differences. Harry Tangi, thank you very much indeed, former police sergeant, and great to have you on. Yes, I think you highlighted how difficult it is in terms of interpretation, but I think jihad being shouted on the streets, probably you don't need to look at the different interpretations.
No, I think it's pretty clear that how threatening that sounds.
I think so. It's very difficult for the police, but it is very interesting that they're willing now to say, oh, we got things wrong. Because back then, I don't remember there being any talk from the police themselves about, oh, maybe we could have done this differently. Maybe we can, I guess, a little bit of hindsight.
Although I have to say, there's a bit of this that doesn't sit quite easy with me for a free speech perspective.
Yeah.
Should people be allowed to shout offensive things on the street? I mean, maybe. Should people be allowed to, as long as they're not inciting direct violence, they should be able to, you know, say things that everyone would find distasteful. But of course, we don't live in the sort of society that has the same level of free speech as the United States of America. And perhaps there's more leeway given to some than others.
Maybe people should technically be allowed to shout horrible things in the streets, but I just wish they didn't want to. So there you go. Let us know your thoughts. gbnews.com/yours. Please do get in touch. Let us know what you make of the police saying that actually we may have got a few things wrong. A few things wrong, but no two-tier policing. Absolutely not. Anyway, this is Good Afternoon Britain. We've got lots more coming up, including...
Yes, the actor and campaigner Idris Elba. He's joined the Prime Minister and Home Secretary to launch a new effort to tackle knife crime on our streets. We'll have more of that after your headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, Emily, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories. A gun salute has marked the anniversary of the King's accession. The 41 gun salute has taken place at Hyde Park in London and marks the 2-year anniversary of King Charles taking to the throne. And that gun salute fired by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. It also marks the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth II. In half an hour's time, a similar gun salute will take place at the Tower of London. In other news, leaders of 2 of the biggest unions have put further pressure on the government over its plan to cut winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners in England and Wales. Unite and the PCS union have both criticised the plan, while Paul Novak, head of the Trades Union Congress, says the government should rethink the plan and consider other lines of support for pensioners. The Health Secretary says the policy will have a negative impact on his constituents, but also insists it's a necessary move. MPs will vote tomorrow on the plans to scrap the payment. New analysis has revealed significant corruption took place in the handing out of COVID contracts during the pandemic. Official reports identify that 135 high-risk contracts with a value of £15.3 billion had 3 or more corruption red flags. Transparency International UK are requesting the National Audit Office, Public Accounts Committee and the Chancellor Rachel Reeves look into those findings. The impact of the COVID pandemic on NHS workers, patients and the delivery of health care is set to be examined by a public inquiry, with that first public hearing currently being held. Campaigners have expressed concern over what they see as a lack of representation of bereaved families. Hollywood actor Idris Elba's joined the Prime Minister in Downing Street to launch a new effort to tackle knife crime. Elba, an anti-knife crime campaigner, joined Sir Keir Starmer this morning as he launched the coalition, which aims to stop young people from being dragged into violent gangs. The coalition will bring together campaign groups, families of people who've lost their lives to knife crime, and young people who've been affected by it, as well as Idris and the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to make it harder to buy dangerous weapons online, as he's pledged to double down on efforts to tackle knife crime. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. I'll be back in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Following some very wet weather over the weekend, today's drier for many of us. Some sunshine, particularly in the west, but some rain also arriving into the northwest later with this frontal system. But for the time being, a ridge of high pressure across the UK and the weekend's rain clearing away, although eastern parts of England still clinging onto some cloud and some patchy light rain through the afternoon. And that does tend to fizzle away later on. Brighter skies follow for the West Midlands, Northern England, parts of the southwest, as well as Wales. Temperatures of 18 to 19 Celsius, a fresh feel, but pleasant enough in the sunshine. Scotland and Northern Ireland, cloudier skies, increasingly so, with some showers turning to longer spells of rain for western Scotland, with some heavy outbreaks through the afternoon and into the evening. Staying bright in the east of Scotland, but increasingly cloudy. Northern Ireland likewise seeing some rain turn up by evening and temperatures of around 15 Celsius. But we've got this slice of fine weather through the Midlands, southern England, South Wales as we head into the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells across the south and southeast, but cloudier skies arrive into Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western England as well as Wales. Outbreaks of rain, mostly light and patchy in the south, but further north that rain will be heavy, accompanied by a strengthening wind. Temperatures overnight dipping to 11 or 12 Celsius, but an unsettled start for northern and western parts of the country first thing. A spell of wet weather moving south through Scotland and Northern Ireland, eventually into central and northern parts of England as well as Wales. Showers to the south of that and to the north of that, with some brighter skies in between the showers, but also a blustery wind and some particularly heavy rain and windy weather for the far north.
The latest GB News travel.
On the southbound side of the M6, there are delays just before junction 8 coming from the M54 of 20 minutes. Southbound on the M23, a lane closure to oil spillage just before Gatwick Airport at junction 9, though traffic is coping well. And that's the same for the westbound side of the M2, though there is a lane closure on the exit slip road at junction 3 to a broken down vehicle. Eastbound on the M27, a lane closure on the exit slip road at junction 11, again to a broken down vehicle, but traffic on the move. Very slow, however, into town on the M4, as there is a lane closure on the entry slip road at junction 4 for Heathrow due to a vehicle fire. And finally, the M25 looking slow through the roadwork area just before junction 10 at the Wisley interchange. And that's your latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, the actor and campaigner Idris Elba, he's joined the Prime Minister in Downing Street this morning to launch a new effort to tackle knife crime.
Well, he's highlighting a coalition which will aim to bring together campaign groups, families of people who've lost their lives to knife crime and young people who's been affected by it.
Now, ministers have already taken steps to ban so-called ninja swords and plan to strengthen the laws around the online sales of knives. So how might this go? What more can they do?
Well, joining us from Westminster is our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Now, Olivia, is anything concrete coming from this, or is this just another talking shop?
It does seem to be more of a conversation than any new policy announcement. It's actually very similar to what we saw on Friday when Yvette Cooper met at the National Crime Association with all sorts of representatives from the CPS, etc. And again, there was very, very little actual concrete policy information coming out of this. This meeting, it seems, was pushed by Idris Elba, knife crime campaigner, who's pushing together a coalition of people from youth workers to police officers to politicians to try and stop people getting into knife crime in the first place. Let's have a listen to what the actor had to say.
Today was identify some of the low-hanging fruit that can be actioned quickly, right? Things around, you know, accessibility on knives, online sales and things like that. These things take time to actually get into law, but today was really about how do we get to them quicker. And so our next step is to aggregate the thoughts that we've had today. We've got a point of contact, and that person will be aggregating those action points, and then those involved in those action points will be then tasked to get them done. The Prime Minister, by the way, is just super keen to just keep pushing, and that's what we've seen, so it's been good.
So a lot of aggregating action points there from this group, this coalition of workers. Not very much concrete policy. One thing that Keir Starmer is doing is getting a review into gaps in legislation around zombie knives. Zombie knives have been outlawed, but there is a lot of concern that zombie knife owners are finding ways around that legislation. In fact, zombie knives were first outlawed almost 10 years ago, and again, these criminals have found ways around that legislation. So it is possible that that legislation might just be tightened up a little, but that's the only really policy development that we have.
Yes, Olivia, I mean, tightening online sales of these horrific knives is, I guess, a good thing to do. People shouldn't be able to go onto Amazon and buy a zombie knife or a ninja knife or a machete. But it's not going to stop people from carrying, you know, a standard kitchen knife and doing damage with that. We've seen so many stabbings across the country where it's just something that you could take from your kitchen.
Well, absolutely, and ultimately this is what is so difficult for every government about tackling the knife crime problem. Obviously, you cannot outlaw the ownership of knives. People need knives for legitimate reasons in their day-to-day life, which is why Idris Elba and knife crime campaigners like him are trying to go down the social route rather than purely the legislative route, trying to stop people getting into knife crime in the first place. But of course, that is easier said than done, particularly in an age of social media. We say it again and again, but it is worth saying because it is very true. There's all sorts of influences coming in from young people, from all sorts of varied sources. One element is perhaps holding social media companies to account. That's something, again, that Idris Elba has been talking about with the Prime Minister this morning. But again, easier said than done. We've seen what happens when the law tries to regulate social media companies. It just doesn't tend to work that well. These companies are so much bigger than British legislation at the end of the day.
And when people start talking about social media when it comes to knife crime, I always just think, hang on, was there no knife crime before around 2010? I mean, this was
always social media.
It was a huge problem in the 90s, and then it sort of it decreased a bit, and now it's been on the increase again. I don't think it's necessarily so, but the government just always wants to find what it can try and regulate.
It's a bogeyman, isn't it? Oh, if Elon Musk regulates Twitter a little more, then we'll all be safe.
It's like when David Amess, the MP, Sir David Amess, was murdered by an Islamist terrorist, and then everyone started talking about anonymity on Twitter. I mean, the guy didn't even have Twitter who killed him.
Well, exactly.
Olivia, I suppose people, to some extent, want to be seen to be doing something. But there is also a risk to that, in that if they pass a lot more laws, ban a lot more knives, and this still keeps on happening, the government might look fairly impotent.
Well, exactly. And I mean, there is a very good argument to make that all of the laws are already in place to prevent knife crime taking place. It is clearly illegal to stab somebody with a knife. And it does sometimes feel as though, in wanting to look as though it's doing something about this terrible, terrible scourge, the government adds in increasingly complex legislation which makes life more difficult for police officers and doesn't actually change the results on knife crime that much, which of course is why people like Idris Elba and knife crime campaigners try and tackle the problem from a different angle, the social angle, trying to stop people wanting to get into knife crime in the first place. And so then you get into conversations about youth groups, social media as well, etc. But again, it all feels pretty small in relation to this absolutely enormous problem.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Olivia Rutley, our political correspondent in Westminster. I think, and I wonder if you agree, it should be zero-tolerance approach. Come down hard, punishment.
If you're found with a knife, time behind bars.
It's got to be. It's got to be, because at the moment you've got kids running around Southend with machetes. You've got small children being stabbed to death at a Taylor Swift concert. You've got people in our city centres seeing young people just carrying knives as if it's just normal these days. I mean, it's got to be a zero-tolerance approach, surely, and stop and search. I wonder if they talked about that.
Yes, I wonder, because it does seem that we do see this more and more, and I don't know if this is just because we're seeing more of this, because everyone carries, in effect, a camera around with them and their phone, and you see people brandishing knives on trains. Or there was that man that jumped onto the back of a bus and had a big machete in his hand. And you just see these really vivid images more than you used to. I wonder, has this stuff always been happening, but we see it more now? Or is this a genuine increase in the incidence of these occasions?
Well, we see everything now, don't we? We see through TikTok, through social media, through wherever, these images, these videos of the most shocking crimes, people just holding knives on public transport, for example. But I think it's got to be zero tolerance. Otherwise, how on earth do you stop someone from just feeling like, you know, no one's going to get them? Well, invincible.
This is the thing. I think the government has shown it can do zero tolerance to people, for example, who joined in with the despicable violence in the riots in August. I mean, if you if you had no criminal record before but were at a riot and shouted at a police officer or whatever, you've had time behind bars. Why is it different for people who are found to be carrying a knife? Even if it's the first time they've come into contact with law enforcement, we've seen that if it's the first time someone's come into contact with law enforcement in the case of the riots, a ton of bricks comes down on them. Why not people carrying knives?
And we should have seen an emergency speech about knife crime following that horrific stabbing attack in Southport, shouldn't we, really? I hope this isn't just a talking shop. I hope they decide that they're going to come down hard on this issue. I don't think a few more youth clubs is going to solve this. But, hey, let us know what you think. The answer is gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up. We're going to be live at the TUC conference in Brighton. This is interesting because the unions are now taking aim at the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, calling him a fraud and a Putin apologist. Why are they so focused on Reform UK?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's have a look at this story in the Telegraph, Charlie. This is about Anglican Church, the Church of England, dropping the word church in favour of something a bit more modern sounding. Words such as community. Why are we afraid of the word church?
Well, that's my question. I mean, you've got to assume that they think it solves some kind of problem. But I think, you know, there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about their particular religious institution, whatever they all have different names, don't they? And if you rename one, do you have to rename all of them? Can we no longer use an individual name for different religions' community buildings?
Are you religious?
I'm spiritual.
You sound like him. Yeah.
No, certainly.
Oh, don't get any started on me.
Do I believe in a God? Yes.
Oh.
Do I believe in any of the particular gods that are offered to us? Still undecided.
I'm like you. I said exactly that.
You two are the same.
about
You two are exactly
What
the
about you, Anas? Are you particularly religious?
Well, I'm not a proper religious. I won't name myself as a religious, but I really do respect religions. And we have bigger problems to think about.
Is it a sign of where we're at in this secular society?
Yes.
Which we're moving more and more towards, that the Anglican Church feels that the only way to be relevant is to take away any reference to church going, to being religious?
I think if the substance of what you're offering is good, it doesn't matter what it's called. You know, so if people are going to find solace and peace in a place that makes them feel better, they're not going to care too much about what it's called. So I think relabeling it, rebranding it, I don't know, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but it's going to certainly upset a lot of people, I should think.
And people whose religion is important to them and kind of central to their lives, you can imagine.
Absolutely.
There's a reason Justin Welby is nicknamed by some quarters the Archbishop of Woke. Maybe this adds fuel to the fire, who knows?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 12 minutes to 1, and the General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress is telling members that Sir Keir Starmer's government have the interests of working people at the heart in a way that the Conservatives never did.
Right, well, speaking at their annual conference in Brighton, Paul Novak told unionists he's prepared to work closely with ministers to deliver for workers and bring what he calls the last 14 years of chaos to an end. OK.
But he's also hit out at the Reform UK leader, Nigel Farage, calling him a Putin apologist and a fraud.
Right, OK. Well, joining us from Brighton is our reporter, Adam Cherry. Adam, how much time did he take slagging off Mr Farage?
Quite a long time, actually. I think the reason is because, in Nigel Farage's own words, the Reform are coming after Labour voters next. And there are a lot of, as you would expect, lots of Labour voters here in traditional trade union working class communities who may be tempted by what the Reform Party is offering at the next election, or at least that's the fear here. So it's no wonder that he's gone after them. Of course, he also, in caveated language, reminded the Labour government that although there's lots of handshaking and backslapping over their stomping victory a couple of months ago, these unpopular decisions, in Keir Starmer's own words, are not popular at all with the trade union movement, of course. Tomorrow, the winter fuel allowance vote is in front of the Commons. That will be voted through, and there's a lot of anger on the floor here about that, as delegates were coming out of the speech when it was over. I was speaking to a few of them as they were coming out, and they all said basically the same thing. They're thrilled that Labour have won. A huge round of applause over all those Tory MPs who were booted out, but the decisions that are being made early on in this new government are worrying them. So it's really a tale of two halves, triumphant but at the same time cautioning the government not to go too far.
Yes, it was very interesting to hear in that big keynote speech the sort of personal attacks that were made against Conservative politicians, listing the names very slowly of those who lost their seats, and almost this jeering coming from the crowd when the names of these individuals were read out. It sounded, to some extent, a little threatening, I thought. But there is this interesting line coming out from Unite and the TUC saying that the proposed withdrawal of winter fuel allowance is cruel. That's a very harsh word to be using.
Yeah, and actually I've just spoken to a few people from the National Pensioners Convention, and they said they sort of summarise what they said, but they said they hated Rachel Reeves. They really don't like her. They don't think she's up to the job, and they're furious about this, pointing out that they think millions of people, millions of pensioners are going to suffer badly, not just those with swimming pools and champagne in their fridge. So, yeah, it's not an easy environment that the Prime Minister enters tomorrow when he gives his speech. I think we saw from Ellie Reeves, the party chair yesterday, a flavour of what we can expect from him. It'll be well done us. We've achieved this great result, but to fulfil our promises to the electorate, we have to make these, again, unpopular decisions early, but trust us and stay with us. That's what I would expect to see tomorrow.
And do you sense that the unions are winning the battle when it comes to workers' rights? I mean, there's been quite a lot of pressure on Angela Rayner, also Rachel Reeves, to water down some of this workers' rights package that they spoke about before the election. Trade unions certainly won't want to let them get away with watering that down, will they?
Oh, no, absolutely not. In fact, as you come in at the entrance to this venue, a new deal for working people, which is Angela Rayner's project, that's emblazoned right across the front of the building here in massive letters. So it's a central plank of what the unions are after here. They're not going to accept any dilution of that. They want those promises upheld. But they know, actually, the Labour government have been, shall we say, have been reluctant to keep hold of all of those things that they promised before the election or over the last few years moving into government. So they are keeping a close eye on that. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, is here tonight at a conference dinner, so I'm sure she'll try and mollycoddle those who are here and assure them that everything is fine. But nonetheless, there is some apprehension and a warning that the unions are going to keep an eye on this.
Well, Adam Cherry, live from the Trade Union Congress. I really appreciate your thoughts on this. It's interesting that there seems to be this fracturing, because when you win a majority, although a massive majority, over 170-seat majority, but on just 33.9% of the vote, can you afford to lose anyone from your right flank or your left flank?
Oh, yes, and there's always the threat of more strikes as well to contend with. This is Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show, so stay tuned. We're looking ahead to that potential Labour rebellion over that winter fuel allowance scrappage. We're also going to be live at the Tower of London to mark 2 years since the King's accession to the throne. Don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Following some very wet weather over the weekend, today's drier for many of us. Some sunshine, particularly in the west, but some rain also arriving into the northwest later with this frontal system. But for the time being, a ridge of high pressure across the UK and the weekend's rain clearing away, although eastern parts of England still clinging on to some cloud and some patchy light rain through the afternoon. And that does tend to fizzle away later on. Brighter skies follow for the West Midlands, Northern England, parts of the southwest, as well as Wales. Temperatures of 18 to 19 Celsius, a fresh feel, but pleasant enough in the sunshine. Scotland and Northern Ireland, cloudier skies, increasingly so, with some showers turning to longer spells of rain for western Scotland, with some heavy outbreaks through the afternoon and into the evening. Staying bright in the east of Scotland, but increasingly cloudy. Northern Ireland likewise seeing some rain turn up by evening and temperatures of around 15 Celsius. But we've got this slice of fine weather through the Midlands, southern England, South Wales as we head into the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells across the south and southeast, but cloudier skies arrive into Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western England as well as Wales. Outbreaks of rain, mostly light and patchy in the south, but further north that rain will be heavy, accompanied by a strengthening wind. Temperatures overnight dipping to 11 or 12 Celsius. But an unsettled start for northern and western parts of the country first thing. A spell of wet weather moving south through Scotland and Northern Ireland, eventually into central and northern parts of England as well as Wales. Showers to the south of that and to the north of that, with some brighter skies in between the showers, but also a blustery wind and some particularly heavy rain and windy weather for the far north.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Labour government wants to introduce a legal right not to be bothered so that staff can ignore bosses' emails and texts and calls outside of normal office hours, including holidays. It's all part of Labour's election pledge to give everybody a right to switch off for the first time ever. Mutaz, do you ever turn your phone off?
I don't. If you want to work in a high-functioning job that pays well in the end, you have to keep your phone off. The workplace is competitive. If you work longer hours, you're more likely to get a promotion.
It depends what job you do. We work in news, the three of us. News goes on all the time. It would be ridiculous to think that we could ever leave our emails or a phone call alone, because we don't know what's about to happen next. But say you're working in a clerical job or a manual job, if it's absolutely 9 to 5 and your job is over by then, there's no reason why you should be contacted by your boss except in an emergency.
Is that because people nowadays, they want to, they don't want to live to work, they want to work to live?
People are more relaxed about work. I'm able to come in here dressed like this. But when it comes to legislation, you've got to be careful because it leads to ridiculous situations. The Euros, when England was playing Spain, one of the Spanish footballers was 17 years old. I think the Spanish FA had to pay a fine because in Germany, a 17-year-old shouldn't work after 8 p.m. or something like that.
Because with me now is the head of employment at Pickering Solicitors, Joanna Robson. Joanna, thanks for joining us. Is it a generational issue?
Yes, I think there is a generational issue. I think younger people, they generally want to make a really good impression. So sometimes you find the younger workforce are the ones that actually want to really put their mark out there and they really want to work longer hours. And that's going to, it's going to be difficult for younger people to, switch off.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 1 o'clock on Monday, the 9th of September. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood. Let's cross now straight to the Tower of London's Gun Wharf, where the Honourable Artillery Company is performing a 62-gun salute to mark the King's accession to the throne. Let's listen in.
The special military celebrations are continuing here in London, marking the second anniversary of the accession of His Majesty King Charles III. A 62-gun salute currently being fired outside the Tower of London by the Honourable Artillery Company. 21 guns is the tradition, dating back centuries really, the ships that would fire their guns, signalling to the friendly harbour that their guns are in fact clear and they are no longer a threat. Plus an extra 20 guns because they are in a royal palace and fortress, of course the Tower of London, plus another 21 because the Tower of London sits within the City of London. It was at precisely 1 o'clock on the word of command that the 62-gun salute was starting to be fired. One of the three guns in turn at 10-second intervals, filling the wharf, as you can see on your screens if you're watching on television, with white smoke. The sounds reverberating from the tower battlements and probably startling a few tourists who are probably watching on Tower Bridge, which is just being masked by the smoke here. Of course, firing blanks over the River Thames outside the Tower of London. The Honourable Artillery Company is the Army's oldest regiment, the British Army's oldest regiment, with a wealth of traditions. And of course, today is all about traditions, because it is 2 years yesterday since the accession of King Charles III, but also very poignantly, very sadly, the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. This is the second anniversary of these traditional gun salutes. Just an hour ago, where I am in Hyde Park, the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery fired a 41 gun salute inside Hyde Park. Again, it is 21 guns as tradition, plus an extra 20 because it is in a royal park.
Cameron Walker, thank you very much indeed, and what splendid guns they are.
Spectacular sight there in the Tower of London, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. So there you go, the 62 gun salute fired by the Honourable Artillery Company. And please do get in touch with us throughout the show. We've got a lot on our plate this afternoon, but we're going to go to the headlines quickly before we're back.
Emily, thank you very much. The top story, and as you've just been hearing, gun salutes are marking the anniversary of the King's accession today. A 62-gun royal salute is being fired by the Honourable Artillery Company at the Tower of London and marks the 2-year anniversary of King Charles taking to the throne. And earlier, if you're watching us on television, you can see the 41-gun salute took place at Hyde Park in London, and that gun salute fired by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. It also marks the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth II. In other news, leaders of two of the biggest unions have put further pressure on the government over its plans to cut winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners in England and Wales. Unite and the PCS union have both criticised the plan, while Paul Novak, head of the Trades Union Congress, says the government should rethink the plan and consider other lines of support for pensioners. The Health Secretary says the policy will have a negative impact on his constituents, but insists it's a necessary move. MPs will vote tomorrow on the plans to scrap the payment.
Play our part in recasting Britain's industrial future. And above all, we'll work with the government to face down those on the right who wish to sow division and discord in our communities. And our message to the tin pot politicians, the street thugs, and any ragtag group that try to promote their message of hate is clear. Not in our workplaces, not in our communities, not on our watch.
Hollywood actor Idris Elba's joined the Prime Minister in Downing Street to launch a new effort to tackle knife crime. Elba, an anti-knife crime campaigner, joined Sir Keir Starmer this morning as he launched the coalition which aims to stop young people from being dragged into violent gangs. The coalition will bring together campaign groups, families of people who've lost their lives to knife crime, and young people who've been affected by it, as well as Idris and the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to make it harder to buy dangerous weapons. Idris says it's time to put ideas into action.
Today was identify some of the low-hanging fruit that can be actioned quickly, right? Things around, accessibility on knives, online sales and things like that. These things take time to actually get into law. The step is to aggregate the thoughts that we've had today. We've got a point of contact, and that person will be aggregating those action points, and then those involved in those action points will be then tasked to get them done. The Prime Minister, by the way, is just super keen to just keep pushing, and that's what we've seen, so it's been good.
New analysis has revealed significant corruption took place in the handing out of COVID contracts during the pandemic. Official reports identify that 135 high-risk contracts with a value of £15.3 billion had 3 or more corruption red flags. Transparency International UK are requesting the National Audit Office, Public Accounts Committee and the Chancellor Rachel Reeves look into those findings. The impact of the COVID pandemic on NHS workers, patients and the delivery of healthcare is to be examined by a public inquiry, with the first public hearing currently being held. Campaigners have expressed concern over what they see as a lack of representation of bereaved families. Now, measures to empower local leaders to take control of bus services have been unveiled by the government. Transport Secretary Louise Haigh claimed her bus revolution will save vital routes nationwide. Legislation giving all local transport authorities new powers to run their own bus services will be laid before Parliament today. There are only a few areas in England where the local bus company is owned by the council, and supporters say it means profits can be reinvested into services. The Metropolitan Police says it's very likely arrests will be made more quickly when it handles large protests in the future. Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist also admitted the force didn't get everything right when policing recent demonstrations. Frequent protests and counter-demonstrations have been held since last October, including by environmental campaigners and from groups calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Well, protests also developed into rioting and disorder after 3 little girls were killed in an attack in Southport in July. Cancer deaths in the UK could increase by 17% by 2029 when compared with the last 5 years, the charity warns. Cancer Research UK also projects new diagnosis to jump by more than a fifth during the same period. Experts say the stats highlight the devastating impact cancer continues to have on people across the UK. They also urged the government to develop a long-term strategy for the disease with a focus on funding research, early diagnosis and prevention. And Noel Gallagher says he is thrilled and honoured to have his portrait added to the National Portrait Gallery, despite, he says, being a grumpy, middle-aged man who hates having his picture taken. Well, the picture, taken by Zoe Law, will go on display for the first time on the 29th of November as part of the London Gallery's Legends exhibition, which will feature 100 portraits taken by Law of people who've influenced her life and career. The image of Gallagher will remain part of the gallery's permanent collection once the exhibition ends on the 2nd of March next year. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 9 minutes past 1. What is going on this week is a pretty seismic vote on the winter fuel cuts. Now, this is a big totemic moment for this government.
It absolutely is. There's talk of potentially 50 Labour MPs rebelling on this. There's been accusations of cruelty from the Prime Minister over this, even that his hair may have gone white as a result of all the stress. But that's a little frivolous. But yes, we're looking at Downing Street. Our political editor has been in a lobby briefing, so we're going to be talking to him very shortly indeed, Christopher Hope, of course. But there's a huge amount of pressure, isn't there? So far, Keir Starmer is justifying this, saying an uptick in the state pension will more than cover this. But of course, the timing of these payments is very difficult indeed in the run-up to the winter months. Lots of charities also speaking out and talking about how potentially there could be deaths as a result of this policy. So this is a very difficult day for the Prime Minister. Tomorrow there will be that vote.
Absolutely, and it's not just the backbench Labour MPs who are speaking out about how this could, in effect, kill pensioners. It's also the Conservatives who are doing research on this. Interestingly, the Conservative Member of Parliament, Neil O'Brien, has been asking the government for estimates of numbers. How many pensioners are going to be affected by this change? He wants a constituency breakdown of these numbers. Now, it seems that the government has done this calculation, but they're not releasing the numbers. So now Conservative researchers are going through the new constituency boundaries and trying to crunch these numbers themselves. It seems like this will be a very pertinent line of debate over the next few weeks and indeed probably stretching on to the next general election. Everyone remembers how Gordon Brown's first big pension decision uprated pensions by a measly couple of pounds, if I remember correctly. That dogged him for the rest of his political career. Could it be that this big totemic vote will dog this Chancellor for the rest of hers?
Do you suspect there will be some kind of compromise in October's budget from Rachel Reeves, that they'll look at all of this backlash, they'll be listening to their backbench MPs, they'll be listening to advisors, charities, the unions, of course, too, who have also spoken out, and that potentially there could be some more targeted help come October?
It's possible. Indeed, we've already
But then what's the point?
We've already seen the language around this issue change considerably the Prime Minister was interviewed yesterday, and when he was asked about it, the first thing he said is that doing this means that we can commit to the triple lock. He's doing this pivot to commit to a much more expensive policy that uprates pensions by more than inflation or average earnings or 2.5%, whichever is highest. Committing to that much more expensive policy in order to cut the cheaper policy. I mean, it seems perhaps he's dug a larger hole trying to justify this move.
He's spending a whole lot of political capital on something that isn't as expensive as other policies, not least the pay offers to the unions. We're going to be speaking to our political editor very shortly. It appears to be quite a long lobby briefing, so we'll join him very shortly. But another man who has been in Number 10 today is the actor and campaigner Idris Elba.
Yes, he joined the Prime Minister in Downing Street this morning to launch a new effort to tackle knife crime. He's highlighting a coalition which will aim to bring together campaign groups, families of people who've lost their lives to knife crime and young people who've been affected by it. OK, well, joining us now is anti-knife campaigner Ken Hines. Ken, tell us a little bit about Idris Elba and his approach to this issue.
Well, I know Idris got involved with, really got to the heart of the matter when he actually went on patrol with Parole, another local young man that has been doing work, getting knives off our streets for many years and being very effective. And Elba have seen firsthand just what a difference one man can make. And from that's happened, he's now taken on the baton and he's driven it to 10 Downing Street. And I'm very happy with the work that he's doing and the profile that he has that's actually put in the spotlight on actually knife crime. But my thing is sadly simply this. We are talking a lot about enforcement. We're talking about being tough on crime and being tough on the nature of knife crime. But it's never going to work. I've been on the street for many years. I'm on the street still today as part of a group called Street Father. You may call it patrolling, but we like to call it street engagement, where we're talking to young people who may be the perpetrator or victim of knife crime. And what I'm saying quite clearly is that unless you start taking a real public health approach to this serious subject, we're going to keep getting this, we're going to keep failing young people. We have to look at the most influential group on children is schools. Schools has children in predominantly their most productive years. And we need to look about ways of we've given children what we call rights. But with our liberalism, it's gone so far that we don't tell them about the responsibility that goes with that rights. If you were to smack a child, you'll get yourself in trouble. If you were to talk too hard to a child now, emotionally damaging that child, you can get yourself in trouble. So it's given to the child, you know, it can do whatever he wants or she wants. And we're feeling the backlash now.
It's almost we've given too much with nothing in return. Ken, I'm interested when you're out on the streets, when you're talking to young people in areas of particularly high knife crime, what do the young people who carry knives say to you about why they do it?
Well, young people says, look, I'm doing it to protect myself, because he says quite clearly that, you know, they've got, you know, they've seen, they don't want to be a victim to a knife crime because it could cost them their lives. So they say they much prefer to be caught with their knives by the police and given a smack in the hand, rather than be caught without it by their opposition and maybe carried to their grave by 6 of their peers.
But Ken, isn't that one of the problems, Ken, that people only get a slap on the wrist? If the criminal justice system, if the police came down very hard on knife crime, had a zero-tolerance approach to even carrying a knife, would these young men, which mostly it is, and boys, stop carrying them?
I don't believe so, because you're not tackling the root cause. And the root cause is a lack of self-esteem. And the fact of the matter is, if you could be putting whatever draconian measures you want, but my thing is, we've lost this teenage group. We've lost them. We've got to go back to primary school. We've got to put in what it is to be a good citizen. What's the role of a good citizen? What's that look like? We've got to look, because I just came back from Lithuania, and I find it so unbelievable to see that they've got no antisocial behavior problems. They've got kids that's been brought up with respect. And the reason they've done that is partly because they've still got a part of the Soviet era that they're carrying forward, but they've got capitalism to go with that. So they've got a combination that is working very well for them. I think we can learn a lot from what they are doing that we are not doing. We've got to stop being
a more cohesive society is more than just punishment, isn't it? Ken Hines, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for your time, anti-knife campaigner.
Well, MPs, of course, have their chance to vote on those winter fuel cuts for pensioners tomorrow. Reports suggesting many Labour MPs could refuse to back the policy, as many as 50. Well, we're joined now by the director of Silver Voices, an organisation for senior citizens in the UK, Janis Reid. Janis, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This is a real totemic moment in the early days of this Parliament.
Well, it is, and I'm afraid they've picked the wrong fight here with older people. I mean, even if they force it through tomorrow during the debate tomorrow, it's not going to go away. I mean, as you said earlier in the programme, this is going to haunt the Labour Party throughout the rest of their term in office, unless they actually change plans. And we don't think this is going to go away at all, because the next target date for us will be the budget on 30th of October, when we'll be pressing the Chancellor to find funds from other means so that older people can be safeguarded this winter.
I mean, Janis, is there not an argument to means test this winter fuel allowance, at least a little bit? I mean, there will be pensioners out there who use this, well, who don't even notice the money to begin with, or they use it as a deposit on their next cruise, or you know, put it in the champagne fund. Should it not be means tested a little?
Well, it's not a king's ransom, is it? £300, and that's the maximum amount that people get. But this is the only argument that the government have got, that there's a few wealthy older people who don't need the payment. You know, I heard Mick Jagger mentioned this morning. Well, of course, Mick Jagger doesn't need the payment. Neither does Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But in order to get the payment away from them, the government is actually talking about removing it from millions of older people who definitely rely on that payment to pay their energy bills during the winter. Actually, Silver Voices has suggested an alternative. And that is, if there has to be a cut-off point, which we don't agree with, but if there has to be one, it should be at the level of the higher rate of tax. So that would remove all these arguments about, you know, billionaires and millionaires and so on getting it. And it would mean that those on modest incomes, because they've got a small work pension or something like that, or they've got savings, that those people would not lose their winter fuel payment.
No, that is a really interesting point there, because it sounds like there might be some negotiation. There might be some negotiation with the trade unions. There might be some negotiation within Parliament itself on how this policy is delivered. Do you get the sense from the politicians you've been listening to and speaking with in the last few weeks that there might be a climb down over this issue?
Well, look, this unites the political spectrum from the left to the right. You know, the unions support the campaign. The charities all support the campaign. Everybody seems to support the campaign, apart from the Labour front bench, who appear to be imprisoned in an echo chamber with their special advisors, somehow thinking that this is necessary to resolve the problems of the economy. And it isn't. Everybody knows it isn't. It's a relatively small beer compared to the size of the budget. And it's just, you know, a virility test that the government has decided to do this, and thinking that older people are soft targets. Well, we've shown that we're not soft targets, and we're not going to go away, even if the regulations go through tomorrow.
Well, quite. Thank you very much indeed. Janis Reid, you are the director of Silver Voices. That's an organisation for senior citizens in this country. Yeah, it's not going to go away. The pensioners are good at mobilising. That really is absolutely...
Powerful electoral bloc.
Absolutely. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain. Let us know your thoughts. We've got lots more coming up on today's show, including the Met Police has actually admitted it made mistakes in its policing of the pro-Palestine protests, but they continue to strongly dismiss any accusation of two-tier policing. Stick with us.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
70% of population will make a judgment on someone just by looking at them. And within 2-3 seconds, we make a decision if we like someone or not.
Really? Is it that quick?
So it's actually very, very fast. So before we have a chance to kind of express what we want to say, our subconscious mind is kind of looking for clues. So you look at someone and you look at their, for example, I don't know, the watch they're wearing, maybe the makeup. I spent literally my whole childhood learning, being absolutely mesmerized by my mom's ability to choose different style of clothing for different style personalities. British definitely take a pride in their appearance. They do spend time to look good. There is a lot of amazing British designers. For me, it was always about that feeling that I've learned from my mom's shop, how the people were living, buying certain things. And I was like, oh my God, they look happy. They've got this big smile on their face. My main objective always was to make people feel good. So now as a stylist, I help them to go through style therapy. I help them to discover colors that are good for their colors that they wear them close to their face, but also it sets the tone for their wardrobe. And then we look at the outfit formula. So it's, yeah. When I look at Ellie's dress sense, I was just thinking, okay, she likes to be polished.
I do like to be polished.
Exactly. Elegant. Timeless. I look at the reference to the dress you're wearing today. It's that kind of Chanel black and white, timeless, never go out of fashion. So for me, it's about, it's not the trends, but how you would like your personal style to be and how timeless it can be.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. It's now 1:25. Now, the Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has admitted that the force made mistakes when policing pro-Palestine protests, particularly in the early stages.
Well, speaking to the think tank Policy Exchange, Matt Twist cited the decision to not immediately arrest demonstrators shouting jihad as an example of the Met not acting decisively enough during the protests.
Well, however, he did insist police tactics had since developed, and he strongly rejected any accusation of two-tier or differential policing.
Well, delighted to be joined now in the studio by the former Scotland Yard detective, Peter Blexley. Peter, have the police finally admitted what a lot of people could see for a long time, that too often they would simply stand on the sidelines and watch what many people would see as unacceptable behaviour go without challenge?
Yes, I think they absolutely have, particularly as Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist admits, with regards to jihad. Let's just rewind those few short months to October of last year, and the police were saying ludicrously that jihad can actually mean a spiritual striving against moral failings. That's how it can be interpreted, and yet there were people with hatred written all over their faces chanting for it, clearly wishing death and genocide upon a whole range of people. It was ludicrous that they weren't more forceful, but this, unfortunately, is what you've got with this current breed of senior police leaders who actually think that policing is a popularity contest and we must curry favour as much as we possibly can, where, of course, that's sheer utter nonsense. They lack experience, they've risen without trace, they don't have operational grip, and consequently, this is the policing that we get.
Peter, you mentioned the chanting of jihad. That, if I remember correctly, was a Hizb ut-Tahrir protest, which was on the sidelines of the mass pro-Palestine protest. And I understand that they decided that there was no offence at all. I believe they spoke to one of the people chanting and, you know, discouraged them from doing it again.
Spiritual striving against moral failings. I mean, it's laughable that they didn't go in there and make arrests at the time. But this, unfortunately, is what we've seen. OK, let's take this admission at face value. It's a positive sign if they're going to learn from it. But, of course, we know in very recent times, look at how the riots were quite rightly quelled by the mobilisation almost instantaneously of 6,000 police officers countrywide. Let's rewind just a few days to the Notting Hill Carnival. The Metropolitan Police, 7,000 officers ready and mobilised for that event. If there's the political will and there's the policing will, so many of the ills that blight this once great nation could be addressed. It's just a case of will they?
It's such an interesting point, because this isn't, of course, to say that everyone on these protests were worthy of arrest. There were many good people who went on these protests who perhaps didn't see or in different bits of where the troublemakers were. But let's not beat around the bush. There were troublemakers there. There were people chanting genocidal slogans. There were people getting away with things that you wouldn't expect on the streets of Britain. Do you think that the police will learn from this now?
I sincerely hope so. I'm going to give some credit now for the policing of the protests at this weekend that's just gone. There were only 8 arrests, 6 from the pro-Palestinian side and 2 counter-protesters. So in terms of the planning, the prep and largely keeping people separated, they did a very competent job. But it's not so long ago that a man with a red football shirt was walking down Oxford Street with Hamas on the back and the number 7. That man has still not been arrested. And I say to the Metropolitan Police, well, why not?
It's quite interesting how our police decided, well, and our government, our politicians, Mayor of London, etc., how they chose to police, because other countries in Europe just decided to blanket ban these types of protests. I believe France had pretty much a zero tolerance after the first 2 or 3. I'm sure they're still going on in smaller numbers, but they did try to completely stop them. Would that have been the right approach, or would that have been too much of an attack on our basic rights to protest?
Well, the police will always say that they will protect the right to protest, and I think, of course, that's the absolute right position to adopt. But we've had 18 of these now, and this report published today has told us what so many of us knew already, and that there is a significant impact on businesses, from shops to restaurants to bars to any other kind of entertainment business in central London, because people in substantial numbers, when these marches are on, are just going, do you know what? I'm not going to London. I'm not going to spend my money, and the economy is being affected.
Oh, you can see that in central London, Regent Street and Oxford Street, empty sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feels empty, apart from the socialist worker placards and the like.
Indeed, and we have a government that's promising growth and talking about growth almost endlessly. Well, that's not going to happen if huge swathes of our capital city are regarded as a no-go area by people who simply don't want to run the risk of getting caught up in these protests.
Well, Peter Blexley, former Met detective, really appreciate your thoughts on this issue. No doubt it won't be the last that we hear of the Metropolitan Police and how they approach these protests.
Yes, please do get in touch, gbnews.com/your say. Lots to come. Is support for Kamala Harris already dwindling? The latest polling suggests Donald Trump is now 1 point ahead of the current vice president as they prepare to face off in a televised debate tomorrow. We'll be discussing that after your headlines.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories. Gun salutes are marking the anniversary of the King's accession today. A 62-gun royal salute has been fired by the Honourable Artillery Company at the Tower of London and marks the 2-year anniversary of King Charles taking to the throne. Earlier today, the 41-gun salute took place at Hyde Park in London, and that gun salute fired by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. It also marks the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Leaders of two of the biggest unions have put further pressure on the government over its plan to cut winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners in England and Wales. Unite and the PCS union have both criticised the plan, while Paul Novak, head of the Trades Union Congress, says the government should rethink the plan and consider other lines of support for pensioners. The Health Secretary says the policy will have a negative impact on his constituents, but he also insists it's a necessary move. MPs will vote tomorrow on the plans to scrap the payment. New analysis has revealed significant corruption took place in the handing out of COVID contracts during the pandemic. Official reports identified that 135 high-risk contracts with a value of £15.3 billion had 3 or more corruption red flags. Transparency International UK are requesting the National Audit Office, Public Accounts Committee and Chancellor Rachel Reeves look into the findings. The impact of the COVID pandemic on NHS workers, patients and the delivery of healthcare is set to be examined by a public inquiry today, with the first public hearing currently being held. Campaigners have expressed concern over what they see as a lack of representation of bereaved families. And Hollywood actor Idris Elba has joined the Prime Minister in Downing Street today to launch a new effort to tackle knife crime. Elba, an anti-knife crime campaigner, joined Sir Keir Starmer this morning as he launched the coalition which aims to stop young people from being dragged into violent gangs. The coalition will bring together campaign groups, families of people who've lost their lives to knife crime and young people who've been affected by it, as well as Idris and the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to make it harder to buy dangerous weapons online. Idris says it's time to put ideas into action.
Today was identify some of the low-hanging fruit that can be actioned quickly, right? Things around, accessibility on knives, online sales and things like that. These things take time to actually get into law, but today was really about how do we get to them quicker. And so our next step is to aggregate the thoughts that we've had today. We've got a point of contact, and that person will be aggregating those action points, and then those involved in those action points will be then tasked to get them done. The Prime Minister, by the way, is just super keen to just keep pushing, and that's what we've seen, so it's been good.
And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez, back in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Following some very wet weather over the weekend, today's drier for many of us. Some sunshine, particularly in the west, but some rain also arriving into the northwest later with this frontal system. But for the time being, a ridge of high pressure across the UK and the weekend's rain clearing away, although eastern parts of England still clinging on to some cloud and some patchy light rain through the afternoon, and that does tend to fizzle away later on. Brighter skies follow for the West Midlands, Northern England, parts of the southwest, as well as Wales. Temperatures of 18 to 19 Celsius, a fresh feel, but pleasant enough in the sunshine. Scotland and Northern Ireland, cloudier skies, increasingly so, with some showers turning to longer spells of rain for western Scotland, with some heavy outbreaks through the afternoon and into the evening. Staying bright in the east of Scotland, but increasingly cloudy. Northern Ireland likewise seeing some rain turn up by evening and temperatures of around 15 Celsius. But we've got this slice of fine weather through the Midlands, southern England, South Wales as we head into the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells across the south and southeast, but cloudier skies arrive into Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western England as well as Wales. Outbreaks of rain, mostly light and patchy in the south, but further north that rain will be heavy, accompanied by a strengthening wind. Temperatures overnight dipping to 11 or 12 Celsius. But an unsettled start for northern and western parts of the country first thing. A spell of wet weather moving south through Scotland and Northern Ireland, eventually into central and northern parts of England as well as Wales. Showers to the south of that and to the north of that, with some brighter skies in between the showers, but also a blustery wind and some particularly heavy rain and windy weather for the far north.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello to you. I'm Jules Buckley. There's queues building for the westbound M62 around the turn off at Ainley Top. That's junction 24. There's a breakdown causing queues blocking a lane. Just west of Manchester Airport over the Wilmslow Road, the A538, shut between the M56 at junction 6. That's the Hill Four Seasons roundabout, and Morley Green around Mill Lane. It shut both ways at the scene of a collision. Now, the northbound M1, the lane shut and the entry slip part blocked at junction 25, the Nottingham and Derby entry and exit there. There's a breakdown causing queues. The Blandford Road North, the A350 in Dorset between Litcham Travers and Beacon Hill is closed both ways for a collision there. And Long Furlong in Findon in West Sussex, the A280 is closed between the Findon roundabout and Clapham for serious collision causing queues. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1:38, and Idris Elba has been in Downing Street today. He's been talking to the Prime Minister about knife crime.
Yes, and some of you have got in touch. David says Idris Elba should have ignored Starmer and Cooper and had a meeting with Peter Bleksley. Yes, lots of love for Peter Bleksley. Although I must say, Nick has got in touch and he says, so basically ban peaceful protest against genocide so the shops can make a living. How about stop the genocide? Then there'll be no reason for any protest. Given you're meant to be an independent, impartial channel, you really do say something absolute rubbish, trying to look like you care. We have a right to voice our opinions in this country. No one has the authority over another to denounce their views, etc., etc. I think it's a good point. I mean, a lot of people would say people have the fundamental right to go out, speak their mind, protest, even if there is a level of disruption.
But do you have the right to close a road?
Well,
a public road, do you have the right to close that? I'm not sure you do. You have the right to say whatever.
Yeah.
Don't close the road.
Yeah, and there are allocated spaces for protests, not least outside the Houses of Parliament. But there you go. That's a view. We've also got Michael, who says protests are not the only problem with London at the weekend. I'm sick of railway closures. So there you go.
Well, shall we head to Downing Street now and speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope? He's been in a briefing with the Prime Minister's official spokesperson all afternoon. Chris, this issue of the cuts to the winter fuel allowance is not going away.
Certainly isn't, Tom and Emily, and good afternoon here for number 10 Downing Street. There is sadly nothing the government will do to mitigate further this withdrawal of the winter fuel payment from millions of pensioners. The government has made very clear in the cabinet meeting behind me, chaired by Sir Keir Starmer, the Chancellor was there, Rachel Reeves, and many other cabinet ministers. They made clear there that this change, this withdrawal of this payment, the £300 payment that would have been paid out in November, will not be changed at all. That will be removed. Instead, the government's doing a lot of effort behind trying to get people to sign up for this pension credit. There's 800,000 more pensioners who have not signed up for that benefit yet. So far in the past 5 weeks, the numbers apply for that benefit has increased by 150%, but that figure is very, very low. Just 17,900 applied in the previous 5 weeks, and that doubled to 38,500. So really, barely touching the sides. Many people are put off by the very long questions you've got to fill in, 243 questions on the paper version. Numbers 10 say that 80% of applications are over the internet, and on there, there's fewer boxes to tick. But as things stand, there is cold comfort for pensioners affected by the withdrawal of the benefit. They're very clear here, difficult decision made by the government, but they must make it, as they say, to balance the books.
But could this surge in applications for pension credit, if it continues, actually outweigh the saving from means testing the winter fuel allowance?
That's a question, Emily, they wouldn't answer. There are suggestions that you get towards the 1.2 million pensioners who may sign up to it, and you do remove the 1.6 billion pounds in savings. So we're not there yet, but certainly that's an unanswered question by Number 10 Downing Street this lunchtime.
It is fascinating to see that this is one of the early battles the Labour Party pick. It could go one of two ways, of course. They will get the vote through, no question about that, with their massive majority. But will it mean that they feel like they have then done the tough decision and everything else they might be a little bit less tough with? Or is this really a new Iron Chancellor? Is this going to be the ladies not for turning 2.0?
Well, certainly an Iron Chancellor, but there is big worries here, I think, for the Labour Party. At 6 p.m. tonight, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, will address members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and this issue will come up. And then at 7 p.m, I can reveal that Alison McGovern, she's the Pensions Minister, she's organised a mass member briefing online of as many Labour members who can get onto that phone call. So 6 p.m, members are briefed, 7 p.m, any Labour member in the country who wants to be briefed by Alison McGovern can log into a Zoom call or a call, a secure way of speaking to the Minister online. And that comes ahead of this vote tomorrow, expected shortly after lunch, when we're going to see a vote by MPs on whether they approve or not of the withdrawal of this benefit. So a very, very tricky time, I think, for the Prime Minister. Before that, he's expected to be addressing the Trades Union Congress in Brighton.
That's very interesting indeed. So they're really trying to rally the troops behind this policy, try desperately to get people on side, even just general members.
That's right, because, of course, this idea was not talked about in the election campaign. No one saw it coming. It was a big surprise in that budget, the sort of budget by Rachel Reeves towards the end of July. No one thought this benefit was being removed, and it does seem to have rebounded quite severely. Many Labour MPs are protesting and saying it's caused a huge issue in their postbox. Many of those Labour MPs aren't used to being in government at all. In fact, most of them are not used to being in government and making tough decisions, and many are not used to getting on the wrong side of the electorate so soon in their time as MPs, and that's why these meetings tonight are so important. But as things stand, Tom and Emily, and bookmark this, there is no change to this withdrawal of the benefit, despite two big unions, including Unite, Sharon Graham, one of the top three donors to the Labour Party. They are saying time for a U-turn. That shows leadership, Sir Keir Starmer. As things stand, that's not going to happen.
And just quickly, Chris, another big issue on the plate of the government is the government's decision to release prisoners earlier than serving half of their sentence, the 40% threshold that the government has instituted, rather than looking at other options like deporting foreign criminals or using space in prisons overseas. Did the government discuss this huge issue at all at Cabinet earlier today?
The answer is no, Tom. Not a single Cabinet Minister mentioned the fact that around 2,000 offenders will be released tomorrow, months early in many cases, after serving just 40% of their term they were sentenced to it, despite the fact you've got thousands of victims who will be deeply upset by this, many of whom have been contacted, we know at GBNews, been called by the probation service to tell them this is happening. Not all, we may be saddened to learn not everyone watches GBNews or pays attention to the news, so many of these people will be hearing for the first time that the offender who's caused their families' lives so much misery is being released early by this government. That issue was not raised today. In the lobby meeting just now with the Prime Minister's deputy official spokesman, we were told there that if they hadn't done this, the prisons would have run out of space and police would have been unable to make arrests. So it's a difficult but necessary decision made by this government. But as things stand, it was not discussed at the Cabinet.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Christopher Hope, our political editor, there outside Number 10. I mean, you've got the Domestic Abuse Commissioner also talking about many women who are having sleepless nights because there could be among some of these early released prisoners people who have committed those types of crimes. Hopefully not, but it's very worrying.
I mean, you can understand why the government is doing this. You know, prisons are full, but they haven't explored in any depth the other options, the deportations that could occur or whatever else. But the fact that not a single Cabinet Minister brought this up at Cabinet today to me, is absolutely shocking. Now, whether they agree with the
closed.
decision or not, they're not going to talk about how it's being implemented at Cabinet. Extraordinary.
Extraordinary. OK, well, weight loss pills are flying off the shelves in Greater Manchester. Ozempic, it's booming in Bolton. Why?
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Janis Joplin shot to fame in 1967, but after releasing 3 albums, she was dead 3 years later at the age of 27, having overdosed on heroin.
Yes, very, very brief life, but towering influence. People like Pink in the modern day have said that she is the influence. But she was around so briefly, I guess, burned very brightly and a very troubled soul. And what we've got is A Night with Janis Joplin, the musical. And I think a lot of the problems, it's been getting very mixed reviews, and I think the problem is with this subtitle, the musical. That does it no justice at all. Really? It's staggering, stunning in an audience. So what we have is A Night with. It's as if she's in concert. She's sitting on the stage. She's swinging from a bottle, and she's singing and giving us little memories, thoughts on life.
I think I see where you're going, because some critics have said it's a fantastic individual performance that sits in an empty vessel of a show.
Yeah.
And you're saying that that's because the expectations of what the show is have been wrong.
Yes, I agree. And I do think that it's obviously a very loving show. There's very little reference to drugs. There's a bit of a throwaway comment. So we don't really look at the demons. What we do is we explore womanhood very powerfully, but also the blues.
How long do we have to see this?
This one it's on until September the 28th. It's on at the Peacock, which is just down by Aldwych in London.
Quite a small auditorium, actually.
No, it's a big auditorium. So the Peacock is it's a bit of a barn of a room. And again, I would say this show might be better in a slightly smaller venue, but I cannot recommend the performances highly enough.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to 10 to 2. Now, here's an interesting one for you. A new poll by the New York Times has suggested that support for the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, is starting to dwindle. This as she prepares to debate her Republican opponent, Donald Trump, tomorrow night. Now, after replacing Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee for the White House, Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, had experienced a strong surge in support. But as November nears and the election date, is the Kamala Carnival beginning to fade? The Kamala Carnival, OK. Well, joining us now is electoral campaign strategist Pablo Ohana. There did seem to be quite a lot of wind in her sails. Things were going quite nicely for Kamala Harris. What's happened?
I mean, you see this a lot in polls, is that, people go up, people go down. I mean, if we were to believe the polls, then, Trump would have lost in 2016, Brexit would have never happened. So I think you have to take every poll with a pinch of salt, and I'm certainly not focusing on what the polls say. I'm focused on the election day and making sure that we get through that day. But you must have been happy when it showed when she was ahead in the polls. Yeah, I mean, any poll that is positive obviously gives you a bit of, wind behind your sail. But I think you have to focus on the goal, which is to get Kamala Harris into the White House, win the Senate, win the House. I think, it's easy for people like me and sometimes you guys as well to kind of get wrapped up in polls, and they can be exciting. And, when you see polls that really go in your favor, it's hard not to kind of be tempted by that and be pulled in by that. But I think you have to, maintain focus, keep moving forward. And trust the process. And I think it's a very tired line, and even I get bored of saying it, but the only poll that really matters is the one on Election Day.
Is the problem here for Kamala Harris that she ran for the White House 4 years ago, promising to ban fracking, talking about defunding the police, having a voting record in the Senate that was pro the Green New Deal and all of these things that now she's suggesting she's not in favour of. And she hasn't had a serious one-on-one sit-down interview. Tomorrow night will really be the first time she's had that one-on-one scrutiny since she became the Democratic Party nominee for president. And the thing is, she's got a record of saying things that she's now saying the opposite of. This is going to be a pretty challenging debate for her.
Not at all. I think she's going to absolutely eviscerate Donald Trump. She is a prosecutor. She knows her stuff. She's a very serious person.
Why is she U-turned on fracking?
I think she's a politician that evolves with the time, and she understands that people have different views on different things. And, it's not the first time that a politician might start off in one place and move to a different place. If you want to talk about flip-flopping, Donald Trump is the king of that. But I think on fracking in particular, you can be in one place if the public changes, if what you think maybe evolves over time, then I think that's it's a perfectly plausible place to be. I don't think that there is anything wrong in a politician moving positions if they decide that actually, they've heard some different opinions, they've maybe read something different.
I guess that's what Sir Keir Starmer would say over here as well, because things have changed since our election. But Pablo, what does she actually stand for? What are her big policies?
Well, look at her record. She expanded healthcare to millions of low-income Americans. She lowered drug costs. The cost of insulin, it's hard to kind of always grasp this in the UK because we have the NHS, which is, of course, incredible. But insulin here in the US at one stage was $600 a month. She brought that down to $35. Her record speaks for itself. I think that she has, she was a fantastic vice president to
Come on, one policy.
To Joe Biden. Sorry?
One policy that she's offering the public.
No, not at all. I'm saying look at her record. She expanded tax child credits. She introduced same-sex marriage. She reduced drug costs. I think, you look
Pablo,
at her record.
I'm really sorry. We're going to have to leave it there because we've actually run out of time. But great to speak to you, Pablo Hanna. We've got lots more coming up, including the Met Police finally admitting they made some mistakes in policing the pro-Palestine protest. Stay tuned.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Following some very wet weather over the weekend, today's drier for many of us. Some sunshine, particularly in the west, but some rain also arriving into the northwest later with this frontal system. But for the time being, a ridge of high pressure across the UK and the weekend's rain clearing away, although eastern parts of England still clinging onto some cloud and some patchy light rain through the afternoon. And that does tend to fizzle away later on. Brighter skies follow for the West Midlands, Northern England, parts of the southwest, as well as Wales. Temperatures of 18 to 19 Celsius, a fresh feel, but pleasant enough in the sunshine. Scotland and Northern Ireland, cloudier skies, increasingly so, with some showers turning to longer spells of rain for western Scotland, with some heavy outbreaks through the afternoon and into the evening. Staying bright in the east of Scotland, but increasingly cloudy. Northern Ireland likewise seeing some rain turn up by evening and temperatures of around 15 Celsius. But we've got this slice of fine weather through the Midlands, southern England, South Wales as we head into the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells across the south and southeast, but cloudier skies arrive into Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western England as well as Wales. Outbreaks of rain, mostly light and patchy in the south, but further north that rain will be heavy, accompanied by a strengthening wind. Temperatures overnight dipping to 11 or 12 Celsius, but an unsettled start for northern and western parts of the country first thing. A spell of wet weather moving south through Scotland and Northern Ireland, eventually into central and northern parts of England as well as Wales. Showers to the south of that and to the north of that, with some brighter skies in between the showers, but also a blustery wind and some particularly heavy rain and windy weather for the far north.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You can beat good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Monday, the 9th of September. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Unions turn on Labour. The trade union movement has turned on Sir Keir Starmer just 66 days into his premiership. The leaders of Unite and the TUC say Starmer's cruel winter fuel cuts pick the pockets of pensioners.
And the Metropolitan Police has admitted to making mistakes in its policing of pro-Palestine protests. The force's assistant commissioner has admitted demonstrators shouting jihad on the streets should have been arrested.
And happy Accession Day. To mark 2 years since King Charles acceded to the throne, Hyde Park hosted the Royal Horse Artillery's spectacular 41-gun salute. And not to be outdone, the Tower of London hosted a 62-gun salute.
And blistering blizzard to blast Britain. Oh, great. Batten down the hatches. An Arctic blast is incoming. What areas will be affected? Stay tuned to find out. I did not know we had to batten down the hatches.
Yeah.
That's news to me.
Arctic blast.
Arctic blast. That's nice.
Do you remember the Beast from the East?
I do. It's cold.
5 years ago or something like that.
It's very cold indeed.
Freezing. Although, have to say, if we get snow with the Arctic blast, I'm heavily in favour.
Why?
I love snow.
Yeah, I guess it's beautiful for a bit until it turns into slush and makes everything more difficult for everyone.
I should clarify, I like snow for about 6 hours.
The railways can't work, the roads can't
work.
That's no different. You know. Everything can't work.
Yeah.
People take days off school, days off work.
Although, do you know what? I've heard that schools have started to ban snowball flights.
Why?
Health and safety.
What, people put rocks in them?
Well, no, they could include some grit, and therefore it would be unsafe to throw a snowball. As if generations haven't been throwing snowballs for hundreds of years.
I mean, we've just been talking about kids carrying around knives. I think snowballs with a bit of grit in them are small fry.
Completely.
Anyway, get in touch, gbnews.com/your say, particularly over this winter fuel payment fiasco. I mean, if it's going to be a cold winter, then there's going to be a lot of pensioners going without the heating. So please do get in touch, gbnews.com/your say. But shall we get the headlines with Tatiana?
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. Let's start this bulletin with some breaking news that Steven Ling, who raped and stabbed Joanne Tulip 60 times in a sadistic murder in Northumberland 27 years ago, should be freed from prison. That coming from the Parole Board in the last few moments. Steven Ling was jailed for life in December 1998 after admitting his horrific attack on Joanne Tulip, who was 29 years old. Ling was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 20 years, which was then reduced to 18 years by the High Court. More on this as we get it. Gun salutes are marking the anniversary of the King's accession today. A 62-gun royal salute has been fired by the Honourable Artillery Company at the Tower of London and marks the 2-year anniversary of King Charles taking to the throne. Earlier, the 41-gun salute took place at Hyde Park in London. That gun salute fired by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. It also marks the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Leaders of two of the biggest unions have put further pressure on the government over its plan to cut winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners in England and Wales. Unite and the PCS union have both criticised the plan, while Paul Novak, head of the Trades Union Congress, says the government should rethink the plan and consider other lines of support for pensioners. The Health Secretary says the policy will have a negative impact on his constituents, but insists it's a necessary move. MPs will vote tomorrow on the plans to scrap the payment. While speaking at the TUC conference in Brighton, Paul Novak said he'll work with the government to rebuild public services.
Play our part in recasting Britain's industrial future. And above all, we'll work with the government to face down those on the right who wish to sow division and discord in our communities. And our message to the tin pot politicians, the street thugs and any ragtag group that try to promote their message of hate is clear. Not in our workplaces, not in our communities, not on our watch.
Elsewhere, Hollywood actor Idris Elba joined the Prime Minister in Downing Street to launch a new effort to tackle knife crime. Elba, an anti-knife crime campaigner, joined Sir Keir Starmer this morning as he launched the coalition which aims to stop young people from being dragged into violent gangs. The coalition will bring together campaign groups, families of people who've lost their lives to knife crime, and young people who've been affected by it, as well as Idris and the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to make it harder to buy dangerous weapons online, and Idris says it's time to put ideas into action.
Today was identify some of the low-hanging fruit that can be actioned quickly, right? Things around, accessibility on knives, online sales and things like that. These things take time to actually get into law, but today was really about how do we get to them quicker. And so our next step is to aggregate the thoughts that we've had today. We've got a point of contact, and that person will be aggregating those action points, and then those involved in those action points will be then tasked to get them done. The Prime Minister, by the way, is just super keen to just keep pushing, and that's what we've seen, so it's been good.
The Metropolitan Police says it's very likely arrests will be made more quickly when it handles large protests in the future. Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist also admitted the force didn't get everything right when policing recent demonstrations. Frequent protests and counter-demonstrations have been held since last October, including by environmental campaigners and from groups calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Protests also developed into rioting and disorder after 3 little girls were killed in an attack in Southport in July. And Noel Gallagher says he is thrilled and honoured to have his portrait added to the National Portrait Gallery, despite, he says, being a grumpy middle-aged man who hates having his picture taken. The picture, taken by Zoe Law, will go on display for the first time on the 29th of November as part of the London Gallery's Legends exhibition, which will feature 100 portraits taken by Law of people who've influenced her life and career. The image of Gallagher will remain part of the gallery's permanent collection once the exhibition ends on the 2nd of March next year. And those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 7 minutes past 2. Now, the Prime Minister could be facing a rebellion over the government's plans to cut winter fuel payments, with reports that as many as 50 Labour MPs could refuse to back the policy.
Yes, even his own Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, he admitted he's not remotely happy about having to take money away from pensioners, but insisted it is a necessary move.
Well, MPs have their chance to vote on the plans to scrap winter fuel payments universally for pensioners tomorrow.
Well, let's head to Westminster and speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope. Now, Christopher, last time I was on this seat, there were no plans for a vote. In fact, I thought the government had vetoed such a vote. How did that come to pass?
I think the government here is looking to try and find a way to allow MPs to let off steam and understand that there are some tough choices to be made in government. But there's no question the government is facing the most difficult day tomorrow of its short 2 months so far in office. Tonight, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, meets with the Parliamentary Labour Party, with many Labour MPs upset by this withdrawal of this fuel benefit for so many millions of pensioners, of some of them who are their voters. And then at 7 p.m, Alison McGovern, who is the Pensions Minister, I can reveal, has called a mass meeting of Labour Party members to explain why they're doing it. And that comes ahead of a vote tomorrow. We're expecting the result around 2 p.m, when, as you say, as many as 50 Labour MPs could not support the government. And then what does the government do? Does Keir Starmer suspend the whip from those who have opposed the government, or gone absent without leave? A difficult day, and that starts tomorrow for Sir Keir Starmer with the TUC conference, when two very big unions have already said you must go back and do a U-turn on this measure, which will save maybe £1.6 billion, which barely touches the side of the £22 billion alleged black hole that the government says is there. So a difficult time for the Prime Minister, and they're facing it head on. We're told from the Cabinet meeting this morning that there was no attempt to say we're going to water down this change. No one spoke out against it. It seems that all the Cabinet are in favour of a measure which will leave many, many pensioners colder this winter.
Now, Chris, you and I were in the room the last time Keir Starmer spoke at that conference venue in Brighton. That was back in, I think it was 2021, when he was the fresh leader of the Labour Party and was trying to push through all sorts of controversial constitutional reform to his party. He was heckled and heckled and heckled. A speech that should have taken an hour took almost 2 hours because of all of the people standing up and shouting at him. Might he have a similar sort of reception from these trade unionists who seem pretty angry about these winter fuel cuts?
Tom, you're right, they might well do. I mean, 2021 is a lifetime ago in politics. Back then, Sir Keir Starmer, there was talk of a leadership challenge from Angela Rayner. Would she have to be sacked or leave the government, or leave the front bench team? A different time altogether. I mean, 3 years later, he is king of all he surveys. But I think people wonder why on earth this government has taken this choice to remove this benefit from so many pensioners. It wasn't mentioned in their manifesto. It's not a manifesto breach, but it is one that has made a clear choice between increasing pay for public sector workers who can work and can get pay rises, or even leave their jobs and get a second job, whereas pensioners are stuck on fixed incomes. And that's why it's so politically toxic, I think, for this government. But of course, we heard from Rachel Reeves at the end of July. She made very clear they need to do this to pay down this large black hole in the public finances they say they've found.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, our political editor there in Westminster. Very interesting that not one cabinet minister spoke out about this policy, considering it was not in the manifesto. Perhaps they knew it was coming. But in the Conservative days, cabinet ministers would speak out quite frequently, would they not?
But also, it's interesting listening to what Rachel Reeves was saying as recently as June or July 2024, saying that the Conservatives should not break commitments on winter fuel payments. Indeed, in 2017, the Labour Party calculated 3,850 pensioners would die if winter fuel payments were means tested. Well, did they not believe it when they said it then? Or are they simply being callous if they're being consistent?
I guess they just say, things change. Things change. Joining us now is politics editor of the HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield. This is very tricky for Keir Starmer. Yes, he has his cabinet on side, none of them speaking out today in cabinet. But this is playing very badly with the public.
It is, and it's playing very badly with Labour backbenchers as well. As you mentioned earlier, up to 50 could potentially rebel either by voting against the government tomorrow or by abstaining, finding something better to do than trooping through the voting lobbies tomorrow afternoon. Now, this is causing severe discomfort, as I say, on the Labour backbenches. I think that is being transmitted to the Treasury. But as Chris Hope was just saying there, thus far anyway, both number 10 and number 11 are sticking to the line. There will be no U-turns, there will be no tweaking of this controversial policy. There'll be no sweeteners, short of basically the campaign they launched last week to try and get uptake of pension credit increased, because if you are on an income threshold that allows you to claim pension credit, then you will keep your winter fuel payment. But that still means 10 million pensioners who received their winter fuel payment last year won't receive it this year, and obviously they're very unhappy about it.
It is, of course, a pretty extraordinary political fight to pick in early days of a government. Of course, we know that the Grey vote is perhaps the most powerful interest group in the United Kingdom. Through all the years of austerity where cuts were made to services for anyone under the age of 65, of course, pensions grew by their fastest rate in history. Free bus passes were maintained, free television licences, all the rest. It was austerity for those in work, but not for those retired. Might we be seeing an inverse of that relationship now taking place?
Absolutely. I mean, during the election campaign, both main parties went out of their way to reassure pensioners that the triple lock on pensions will be maintained throughout this Parliament. Now, Labour have said they're sticking to that, but there was certainly no mention during the election campaign of winter fuel payments being taken away. Now, remember, winter fuel payments were actually introduced by a Labour government under Gordon Brown many years ago, so this is a really big deal. And lots of Labour, not just backbenchers, but people in government are scratching their heads as to why Rachel Reeves has decided to pick this particular fight so early in this government's tenure. When you look at what it saves, something like £1.5 billion, really, it's chicken feed, really, when you look at the overall size of the government's budget. And yeah, it's, as you say, they're a powerful lobby group, pensioners. They do tend to vote come election time, so they have it in their gift to really punish Labour when they next go to the country, either at the next general election or the upcoming local elections, because there will be many local elections, obviously, between now and then.
Yes, OK. Well, thank you very much indeed. Kevin Schofield, politics editor of the HuffPost UK. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, I'm sure quite a lot of people on the pensions will get in touch and say what you said was outrageous, Tom.
What, that there wasn't austerity for older people? Well, I think that...
They use public services, do they not?
They do, but whilst there were pay freezes for people in work, pensions did rise in the last 14 years by the fastest rate they've ever risen, thanks to the triple lock. That was introduced.
You should be grateful.
Well, I just think it's a fact that the amount spent on pensioners rose while the amount being spent in other areas of the economy fell.
Yes, but when you say that, people will point to the state pension elsewhere in the world and look to the continent and say it's far more generous, and that actually, very difficult for someone to live purely off the state pension.
Yes.
These days.
Yes, that's...
Frankly, impossible, depending on where you live.
Depending on where you live and whether you own your house outright or not. And
have other income.
Lots of different factors. But saying these levels start... I mean, it used to be the case that there was a huge degree of pensioner poverty, that pensioner poverty was the biggest blight in society. Now pensioners as a group have less poverty than those in work, proportionally.
Sad state of affairs, really. But John's got in touch. He says, I bet anything that Rachel Reeves finds the money to pay pensioners, and that will be her rabbit out of the hat come the budget. What, do you think this is all some kind of game? That actually they will find the money magically and then everyone will love them again.
Terrifying people for a game. I doubt it, to be honest. I think the U-turn would be humiliating.
That's very cynical from John.
But we're going to go back to some of that breaking news we heard at the top of the hour now. The Parole Board says that Steven Ling, who raped and stabbed a woman 60 times in a sadistic murder 27 years ago, should be freed from prison. Well, it's a truly shocking story, and we can get more on it now with our national reporter, Charlie Peters. Charlie, what do we know?
Well, you will never be released so long as it is thought that you constitute a risk to women. That's the language used by Mr. Justice Potts when he sentenced Steven Ling in the December of 1998 to a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. That was later reduced to 18 years by a High Court judge in 2009. He's been in prison now for 27 since being arrested in 1997 after that Christmas Day murder. This is now Steven Ling's 5th parole hearing, and he is now set to be released. Speaking at the parole, the parole board, which happened earlier this year in July, 2 psychologists spoke of his enduring shame about his monstrous past. Now, one of the psychologists said that the risk that Mr. Ling posed was not imminent and was manageable in the community. They added, I believe that now means his risk is at a level where he does not need to be kept in prison anymore. Now, it's important to stress that in 2022, the then Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, personally intervened to prevent Steven Ling from being released. He overruled a plan to transfer Ling to an open prison. That was another recommendation by the Parole Board that year. Once you've reached your minimum sentence as part of a life sentence, that minimum term, you are allowed to apply to the Parole Board every 2 years. It's not like a whole life tariff where there's no chance of parole. Now, as you can imagine, this decision has been met with some sharp reaction, least of all from Doreen Soulsby, the mother of the victim of this appalling case, who said that she was appalled and disgusted by the Parole Board and that they've made this decision to release my daughter's murderer into the community. She also said, that man committed horrific offences against my daughter, and yet it is deemed not to be high enough risk and is safe to be released from prison. It's outrageous. Doreen Soulsby has urged Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, to intervene, use those legal powers that Mr. Raab used 2 years prior and stop this from happening.
And Charlie, remind us of some of the horrific details of this case. Some of the details are truly horrifying. Raped and stabbed this woman 60 times, also carved swastikas.
Yeah, swastikas and crosses were carved into the body of Joanne Tulip at a house where Steven Ling was living at the time on Christmas Day 1997. He was a farm worker, and at the time of the sentencing in 1998, where Steven Ling pleaded guilty in the court to this count, the judge did refer to an act of sadism occurring as part of this murder. Over 60 stabbings. He later admitted that he also had raped her. It is a truly appalling case, and one that will test, I think, Shabana Mahmood at a time when there is a lot of focus on the Justice Secretary about who is being released from prison.
I mean, if life doesn't mean life for something as heinous and sadistic, as you say, as this kind of crime, I mean, it does... You know, who gets life then?
Yeah, what is it? What is life for? I mean, it also gets to a big debate about what prison is for. Is prison about reforming people so that then they can get out and back into the community as soon as possible? Is prison about keeping society safe by blocking people, frankly, who would do others harm? Or is it about a sense of justice and punishment for those who commit evil acts? I mean, it would suggest to me that looking at this case, the Parole Board thinks it's option number one. It's all about getting people back out into the community as quickly as possible.
Yeah, they look at risk. They look at risk. Prison is there to rehabilitate and to reduce the risk to the community. It has multiple functions, of course, prison. There is a punishment aspect right at the front, the deprivation of liberty, but the option and the goal of imprisonment is to rehabilitate and return someone to society. That's why you have the parole board as part of that minimum term on a life sentence. It's only in very rare and exceptional cases that you find people given those whole life tariffs that prevent them from ever being released. I think it's worth noting that this is now the 5th time that Steven Ling has appeared in front of the parole board. There is still this campaign from the family, who very understandably do not want this man to see freedom. Indeed, I think many people watching and listening to this will be stunned that he has been granted freedom. And there will also be additional concerns as part of the risk management offending review that goes on, where he might end up. And how confident are we that the probation services and the custody staff involved in this process will be able to keep an eye on it?
Well, that's the big question. Let out into the community, monitored, and there will be, you know, institutional... Well, we've seen institutional failures time and time again, haven't we? Yeah. Where people who've committed crimes are allowed back out and then they go on to commit further crimes.
The probation service is under enormous strain at the moment. And I actually spoke to someone who's been released from prison a few months ago, earlier today, about a completely separate situation, just to get an understanding of how they're dealing with their situation since leaving prison, how the probation services were with them. Overwhelmed is the word that prisoner used to describe the services. They can't get them accommodation, they can't find them work. Another 1,700 to be released tomorrow in a separate situation. But clearly they're under a lot of pressure, especially with these very significant offenders with sadistic crimes on their record set to be released into the community.
Do we know how old he is now?
He was 23 at the time of the offending in 1997. Sorry, I'm not that good at maths.
Well, he'll be in his mid-40s.
Yeah, he's not an old man.
No.
Not an old man.
Charlie Peters, thank you so much for bringing us the details on that horrific case. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Much more coming on today's show. We're going to be back in Brighton. Trade unionists have taken aim at Reform UK and their leader, Nigel Farage, calling him a Putin apologist fraud. Why are they coming after Nigel?
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
What prompted you to go on your incredible journey?
Well, you know, I was fighting my own demons at the time, you know, before I started the walk, and it had been a long journey, if you like. And, you know, I knew that I needed to make a change, and my daughter had just flown the nest. I was a single parent before this, and previous to that, I was ex-parachute regiment. And I knew that I needed to make a change, because if I didn't, I'm not sure where I would have been now, if that makes sense. So, yeah, something just came into my head at the very end of July and said, look, go and walk the UK coastline. And that's exactly what I did. And 6 years later, we've just finished.
You met your missus on the journey as well, didn't you? So truly, Chris, a transformative journey for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, you step into the unknown like that, you know, you have no idea how things are going to work out. You go out with so little expectation, but only really with the aim to, you know, for me personally, to come back feeling a lot better than what I was before I left. And that certainly succeeded. So everything that happened along that journey was one big learning curve. And I got to learn a lot about myself, a lot about, you know, the public and people. And yeah, it was just a life-changing transformation for me. And, you know, I learned so much, and I know what I want to do with the rest of my life as a result of it. And I met the most amazing people, and, you know, worked hard. 6 years of carrying your house on your back isn't the easiest feat in the world, I can promise you that, but it was worth every single step, because, yep, I rescued a dog along the way. I met my now fiancée, Kate Barron, along the way, and we had a baby together along the way as well. So to start in the position that I did and then end up with all of that coming over the line with me was just something that I never expected, and I couldn't have dreamed it up, to be honest.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past 2. Now, the General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress is telling members that Sir Keir Starmer's government have the interests of working people at heart in a way that the Conservatives never did.
Speaking at their annual conference in Brighton, Paul Novak told unionists he's prepared to work closely with ministers to deliver for workers and bring what he calls the last 14 years of chaos to an end.
It's an appropriate name for a trade unionist, isn't it? Paul No Work. He also hit out at the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, calling him a Putin apologist fraud.
OK, well, joining us from Brighton is our reporter, Adam Cherry. OK, Adam, we've just read out a few highlights, but what else is going on at this Congress? How important is it?
I've been speaking to lots of delegates and visitors over the last couple of hours to get their feeling for both the response to Paul Noack and the government's actions over the last 2 months. And I think, as you would expect, everyone here is furious about the winter fuel allowance cut. I spoke to members of the National Pensioners Convention who were particularly furious with the Chancellor, and we caught it on camera, so why don't you just have a look? This is what they had to say.
It wasn't in the manifesto. I don't particularly like the Chancellor anyway, but that's my...
Why is that?
I just don't think she's got the gravitas to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. She may well have worked in the Bank of England as an economist, but that doesn't give her the experience really to be Chancellor of the Exchequer of this country.
It doesn't bode well when you had the two child policy rebellion, and immediately they were slapped down with 6 months suspension from the party. So there'll be a lot of people that will, I suspect, vote with the government on the policy. I would hope that a majority would abstain to allow the policy to fall because it's a bad policy.
They're not the only ones. In fact, on stage right now, as I'm speaking, is Sharon Graham, the General Secretary of Unite, one of the biggest unions in the country. And she's just said that Labour are picking the pockets of pensioners and calling for a wealth tax on the top 1%. Furious about this. Obviously, the Prime Minister is here tomorrow to deliver his own speech at the same time or on the same day as his MPs vote against, or vote in favour, rather vote for scrapping the winter fuel allowance. So it's not the rosy day that you would expect here at the conference, given this is the first TUC Congress in 15 years since a Labour government. So a slight tense mood here, guys.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear from some of those delegates about Rachel Reeves. Not much support for her. Not much love for her, which is quite interesting. And I have a theory that perhaps Keir Starmer delivered that very miserable speech in the Rose Garden in order to perhaps protect Rachel Reeves a little bit, because she's going to be the one that delivers the really bad news in the budget for a lot of people. So if Keir Starmer sort of, you know, says that everything's going to be terrible, then Rachel might be let off the hook a little. I don't know.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how he delivers his speech tomorrow. That might clue us in on that. Ellie Reeves, Chancellor's sister and the Labour Party chair, was here yesterday, and she essentially said, look, we might disagree with the unions as a government from time to time, but remember, this party was born out of the trade union movement. We are allies here, and we're going to try and work together. So I suspect that's the approach he will take, try and absorb some of that damage early on. You know, they're 2 months in, and they have a massive 170-seat majority, so they're banking on making these unpopular choices now. They call them unpopular themselves, and then in 4.5 years, hopefully reap the rewards.
Well, Adam, something else interesting, just very briefly, was the mention of Nigel Farage at this conference. Does the spectre of Reform UK haunt the halls in Brighton?
I suppose so. And yeah, Paul Nowak's saying in his speech today and in a press conference yesterday that Farage is a fraud and so on, but also acknowledging that Reform voters are also trade unionists. There will be people walking around here who voted for Reform 2 months ago, and he doesn't want to upset them and is trying to welcome them in. Obviously, Farage and Reform have said themselves that they're coming for Labour voters in the next election, so they know that this is dangerous territory for them and they don't want to lose them. So attacking Farage, but very clear that they're not attacking Reform voters.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Adam Cherry, for being there at the TUC Congress. Now, it is accession day for the King. We're going to be outside Buckingham Palace straight after your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much. The top story. Well, gun salutes have marked the anniversary of the King's accession today. A 62-gun royal salute was fired by the Honourable Artillery Company at the Tower of London and marks the 2-year anniversary of King Charles taking to the throne. And the 41-gun salute took place at Hyde Park in London. That gun salute fired by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. And it also marks the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Leaders of 2 of the biggest unions have put further pressure on the government over its plan to cut winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners in England and Wales. Unite and the PCS union have both criticised the plan, while Paul Nowak, head of the Trades Union Congress, says the government should rethink the plan and consider other lines of support for pensioners. The Health Secretary says the policy will have a negative impact on his constituents, but insists it's a necessary move. MPs will vote tomorrow on the plans to scrap the payment. The Metropolitan Police says it's very likely arrests will be made more quickly when it handles large protests in the future. Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist also admitted the force didn't get everything right when policing recent demonstrations. Frequent protests and counter-demonstrations have been held since last October, including by environmental campaigners and from groups calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Protests also developed into rioting and disorder after 3 girls were killed in an attack in Southport in July. And Hollywood actor Idris Elba has joined the Prime Minister in Downing Street to launch a new effort to tackle knife crime. Elba, an anti-knife crime campaigner, joined Sir Keir Starmer this morning as he launched the coalition which aims to stop young people from being dragged into violent gangs. The coalition will bring together campaign groups, families of people who've lost their lives to knife crime, and young people who've been affected by it, as well as Idris and the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to make it harder to buy dangerous weapons online, and Idris has said it's time to put ideas into action. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. There's more news in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Following some very wet weather over the weekend, today's drier for many of us. Some sunshine, particularly in the west, but some rain also arriving into the northwest later with this frontal system. But for the time being, a ridge of high pressure across the UK and the weekend's rain clearing away, although eastern parts of England still clinging on to some cloud and some patchy light rain through the afternoon. That does tend to fizzle away later on. Brighter skies follow for the West Midlands, Northern England, parts of the southwest, as well as Wales. Temperatures of 18 to 19 Celsius, a fresh feel, but pleasant enough in the sunshine. Scotland and Northern Ireland, cloudier skies, increasingly so, with some showers turning to longer spells of rain for western Scotland, with some heavy outbreaks through the afternoon and into the evening. Staying bright in the east of Scotland, but increasingly cloudy. Northern Ireland likewise seeing some rain turn up by evening and temperatures of around 15 Celsius. But we've got this slice of fine weather through the Midlands, southern England, South Wales as we head into the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells across the south and southeast, but cloudier skies arrive into Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western England as well as Wales. Outbreaks of rain, mostly light and patchy in the south, but further north that rain will be heavy, accompanied by a strengthening wind. Temperatures overnight dipping to 11 or 12 Celsius. But an unsettled start for northern and western parts of the country first thing. A spell of wet weather moving south through Scotland and Northern Ireland, eventually into central and northern parts of England as well as Wales. Showers to the south of that and to the north of that, with some brighter skies in between the showers, but also a blustery wind and some particularly heavy rain and windy weather for the far north.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello again to you. I'm Jules Buckley. There's a breakdown eastbound on the M62, just starting to cause delays. A lane shut from Birchwood at 11 through towards the Eccles interchange at junction 12. The northbound M1 at the turn for Nottingham and Derby junction 25. The entry slip there is partially blocked. There's a breakdown there. It also means slow going, a lane blocked on the main carriageway. M4 in southeast Wales, eastbound away from Newport, junction 24 the Caldra to Mega 23A. There's queues and lane 1 is currently coned off. Southbound M23 just before Gatwick Airport at junction 9, a lane shut for an oil spillage there. And the eastbound M20 in Kent's queuing, all the traffic temporarily being held at the turn off of the M25. The Swanley interchange there at junction 1, animals there on the carriageway. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Right, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 2:37 and it's that time of the day where we check in with Martin Daubney, who's up at 3 o'clock. Martin, what have you got in store this afternoon?
Well, it's a fabulous show today, fellas. Well done on that front. So, Black Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter, Refugees Lives Matter. It seems that everybody's lives matter to the Labour Party unless you're an old age pensioner. Why on earth are they choosing this hill to die on? And why on earth is a report out by the Labour Party in 2017 predicting 4,000 deaths not going to happen now? There are more pensioners now. Energy is higher price now than ever before. I'll be joined by a guy who started a new movement called the Pensioner Vote. He'll be naming and shaming every single member of Parliament who votes for the winter fuel allowance cut tomorrow, and will be applying pressure in every letterbox, in every constituency, on everyone to name and shame them. That's the kind of people power we like here at GB News. Talking of which, I'll also have some exclusive footage from Calais. An intrepid journalist was over there filming an attempted dinghy departure, and he even got involved and stopped one himself. It's chaos in Calais. We'll have exclusive footage on the show 3 till 6 p.m.
Goodness me, a sort of vigilante action there, stopping the boats. Well, if the French police won't do it, I suppose other people will. Martin, looking forward to it, 3 p.m. See you then.
I think that's a good point. People see their taxes squandered on a daily basis, and then it's pensioners who are having their benefit taken away. Right, anyway, weight loss drugs. They're being used more frequently around the world, but some experts are concerned that people are using them incorrectly.
Well, new research has revealed the hotspots in the UK for people researching these drugs, with Bolton in Greater Manchester being at the top of the list.
Interesting. Well, our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, she spoke to one woman who lost 10 stone using one of these drugs.
Saxenda, Wegovy and, of course, Ozempic. Just some of the weight loss drugs making recent headlines. Used to suppress appetite, if taken correctly, these drugs can help those who need it to lose large amounts of body fat. Just one of those people was Colleen Calnan.
I was over 25 stone at that point and was delusional, and I had amazing results. I lost like 10 stone, and it was a hard journey, 150%, but it was one of the best things I've done. Obviously I've had a gastric sleeve now I'm back to what I should be, I suppose.
But despite her amazing results, Colleen still advises caution.
It's dangerous. It's a black label medication. Yes, it changed my life, but it needs to be used responsibly.
Speaking on weight loss drugs, the National Medical Director for the NHS has also warned medical professionals to take care. He said they can be dangerous if they're being prescribed without proper checks, so online pharmacies and clinics need to act responsibly. They should have safeguards in place, including checking a person's weight in person to keep patients safe. At the Prestwich Pharmacy in Greater Manchester, they're advising people only to use these products with the appropriate support.
Always use a professional. You may need to get bloods done. You certainly have to measure your
blood pressure. And it's really important that you have a support network that helps you get to your target goal. This isn't about a quick fix, it is about a lifestyle change.
However, despite warnings, these weight loss drugs are still in high demand. In particular, new data from the Simple online pharmacy has found that 4 of the top 10 places in the UK researching these drugs can be found in Greater Manchester, with the town of Bolton taking the top spot.
Would you ever consider using a weight loss drug?
No, not me. Not because of my age and because of the complications of using them.
I would, just because I think it's easier than going to the gym. And obviously everyone my age wants to be skinny.
I think if it work and it wouldn't have really bad side effects, then absolutely.
If you're going to lose weight, you should do it the ethical way, like working out.
A topic that divides opinion, the use of weight loss drugs has skyrocketed in recent years. And for now at least, it's a growing trend. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Gosh, I wouldn't want to go around a city centre asking people if they think about taking a weight loss jab or not. But I'm glad Sophie Reaper did.
Absolutely intrepid
I'd be a bit offended. Like, oh, do you think I need to?
But I do think this is such a fascinating story, because the whole history of sort of modernity has been all these weight loss fads and different things and pills and gastric bands and all the rest of it. And finally, there's been this miraculous discovery of what can only be described as a miracle drug. This thing actually works. It's less expensive than some of the other options. And for people who are severely overweight, for people who are morbidly obese, every single person should be on this.
Yeah, but you know as well as I do that it's not just the morbidly obese who are taking this drug. It's people who just want to lose a couple of inches around their waist when they're perfectly svelte. And I think that's a bit of an issue. I don't know if you saw in the Daily Mail, it was leading the website for a little while, Kate Moss and her heroin chic, and apparently, parents of young daughters were speaking out against her and coming up to her in the streets and saying, you're promoting this skinniness. I do wonder if Ozempic has brought that back. You know, I look at quite a lot of female content, young female content online, and there's a lot of, accusing each other of being on Ozempic if they lose a bit of weight. It does feel like skinny, very skinny is in.
But why is it an insult to say that you've been on Ozempic? I don't think that's something to be ashamed of at all. I think that it should be celebrated if people want to, voluntarily lose weight, particularly if they're very overweight. I mean, why is that wrong to say? I feel like there's been maybe the... yes, I see the concern about people getting really skinny. Yeah. But I think there's been too much... the sort of fat acceptance movement, that you can be healthy at any weight. Rubbish. That's rubbish. That's complete rubbish.
Yeah, it is complete rubbish. I just hope that this is a miracle drug and we don't find out that there are lots of awful side effects. But I do think that for people who are very overweight, it is probably a good option. Less invasive than a gastric band, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And of course, there are some side effects, I think. People feel sick sometimes and all the rest of it. But compared to the side effects...
Boris Johnson couldn't hack it.
No, he couldn't. But compared to the side effects of being very fat, of which there are many, your chance of cardiac arrest is much higher, your chance of all sorts of cancers is much higher. I mean, you need to weigh out the risks and rewards of doing anything. And so for some people it will make much more sense, and for some people it won't.
Apparently you can eat through it if you really are desperate to gorge.
Goodness me.
Yeah. Now, there you go. Let us know. Perhaps you're on Ozempic or a similar weight loss jab and it's worked wonders for you, or perhaps, like Boris Johnson, it didn't do the trick. But let's get some views. Patrick says, this is on... we were talking about the shocking case of Steven Ling, who may well be let out of prison. He was supposed to serve life. Patrick says, it's crazy that we release murderers early, but have jail spaces for those people who write hurty words against you online. What on earth is happening? And yes, this comes in the context of tomorrow, which is that big prison early release day. 1,700 people released early.
Well, Livy says, my husband paid into a union all his working life. The reps never really did anything for him. They just played at being the big guys. When he looked back at all the money he'd paid, he couldn't believe it after 40 years.
Yes, you have to sign up to all the political asks, don't you, at the same time? Dave says, watching that display down in Brighton, I'm forced to ask whether these unions think they run the country now. Well, they certainly want to. They said, we're willing to work with the Labour Party to solve all these things. Of course they are. Of course they are.
Echoes of the 1970s.
Yes, well, keep the views coming in. We love to read them. This Good Afternoon Britain. Coming up, an Arctic blast is incoming.
Yes, which areas will be affected? Stay tuned and find out.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I'm not saying I don't want to be a mum, and I'm not saying I don't want to work, but it's definitely not easy.
It's just really tough for us mums, you know. Our job's never done, our work is never finished, and I think it's this movement, the real out-of-office movement, is something that just really resonates with me, and I think we should all talk more about how much work we do. I think a woman's work is never done, but I just think we all feel guilty. We have that mum guilt, you know. If you're working and being successful, you wish you were at home with the kids, and if you're at home, you're thinking, am I doing enough work?
Yeah, and of course the cost of childcare in this country means that a lot of families just frankly make that decision to have one of the parents stay at home, usually the mum, and they're just being squeezed out of the economy, and that's not good either.
Once you've done your job as a working mum, you come home and you're doing another 8 hours on top of it.
Mothers have a tendency, definitely historically, just to crack on with it. It's just something that they are expected to do, that they do without moaning, and now it's like...
Are we getting to a stage where go down that well? In my experience, I have had someone say to me, well, if you can't handle it, why do you have kids?
Oh.
You know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yet, exactly that. We just need to talk about it, and I think it's healthy, and I think that's the main thing now, that we should be brave enough to be able to say, do you know what, sometimes it's difficult, but I'm really proud to be a working mum, and I tell my daughters that. I work really, really hard, and it's a good work ethic for them, you know, and that's what, you know, this campaign's all about.
Is there some resistance still, do you think, from some parts of society?
I do think there's resistance, and that's what this is about, is to try and get people talking about the fact that it has been awkward in the past, and some people don't understand a working mum's life, and that's why we need to try and talk about it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to 10 to 3. Now, the United Kingdom is bracing for an Arctic blast this week as temperatures are set to plummet following a weekend of wet weather for many.
Brilliant, brilliant. The Met Office warns of chilly conditions, more showers, colder air moving in from the Arctic.
Wonderful. Lovely to have such a glorious end to a British summer.
That's it, isn't it?
London and much of the country will experience a significant drop in temperatures, with daytime highs struggling to reach 15 degrees Celsius and overnight lows dipping to 7.
OK, well, it's not absolutely freezing,
No.
but let's speak to meteorologist John Ketley. John, what's to blame for this cold blast we're expecting?
Well, it is a cold blast. It is an Arctic blast. I think there will be a run of everybody going for some cock-a-leaky soup for a few days, but it's not the end of the world. You know, I think it is going to be a very short snap of chilly weather coming in from the north. What we've got at the moment is a band of heavier rain approaching northwestern Scotland, and that's going to turn to gales and heavy rain through the Northern Isles through tonight and tomorrow morning. And it's behind that, as that moves into the North Sea during tomorrow, it will introduce this much colder north to northwesterly wind, which will bring temperatures right down. Don't forget, on Saturday, the temperature in Northern Ireland and Scotland, the west of Scotland anyway, did get to 27 or even 28 degrees. So it is a big, big change. There's no doubt about that. I can't see there being any snow lying. I don't think schools will close anywhere in the next few days. But we are certainly going to see temperatures plummet. And I think, say, Wednesday and Thursday in particular, we're going to see 15 degrees at best in the south, and further north, well, certainly in northern Scotland, never get above 9 or 10 degrees. So it's a big change, and there will be a frost in the north as well.
John, this has been the most miserable summer I can remember. I thought that this country was supposed to enjoy balmy Septembers, where the real sort of heat came about sort of, you know, at some point halfway through September. And now we're getting this Arctic blast. What's going on?
Well, the only thing balmy is the weather, really, Tom, isn't it? I mean, the weather is balmy in this country. You can never take it for granted in any week, in any month, in any year. And just 12 months ago, and this is difficult to take in, you sit down while you listen to this, 12 months ago exactly, the temperature was 31 degrees C in the southeast of the country. So what a change. You see, you've forgotten, Emily, hadn't you? You've forgotten all about that.
I'd forgotten. Is the weather actually getting worse, John? Because lots of people are saying this. You know, I remember the summer used to be very distinct, the winter used to be very distinct, and now we're all sort of muddled in the middle.
Yeah, I think the seasons are a little bit amorphous these days. It is very difficult to judge which season you're in sometimes. And we've all heard this phrase, you can have 4 seasons in one day, and I think that's going to be taking over in the next few weeks as well. So, you know, I'm not a great fan of this idea that we're just on an exponential curve into heat. Nothing like it, because this has been said for 20 or 30 years, and it's never really happened. We've had short snaps of very hot weather, agreed, but it doesn't really take off. And for most summers, it's still pretty ordinary, it has to be said. This year, I agree with Tom, has been just one of the worst that I can remember. Although I did grow up in the 50s and the 60s, and they were dire, I can tell you that.
Although the summer, was it 70, 74, 76?
75 and 76 were brilliant, yeah, they were. They came out to the blue, really. They came out to the blue, and that's what made them even better. 83, 95, some more good summers.
It's funny because just a couple of years ago we were experiencing well beyond 30 degrees centigrade. You were sort of baking as you walk down the streets, all these hot weather warnings, and now it's the opposite.
I'd love a hot weather warning.
Well, John Ketley, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I don't envy being a meteorologist, I have to say. It seems like it's an impossible job to get right because it changes so frequently.
It does change so frequently. I remember in the run-up to my wedding day, it changed every single day. One day it was going to be stunning sunshine, one day it was going to be rain. Anyway, that's it from us. I'll shut up. This has been Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver will be back tomorrow. Don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Following some very wet weather over the weekend, today's drier for many of us. Some sunshine, particularly in the west, but some rain also arriving into the northwest later with this frontal system. But for the time being, a ridge of high pressure across the UK and the weekend's rain clearing away, although eastern parts of England still clinging on to some cloud and some patchy light rain through the afternoon. And that does tend to fizzle away later on. Brighter skies follow for the West Midlands, Northern England, parts of the southwest, as well as Wales. Temperatures of 18 to 19 Celsius, a fresh feel, but pleasant enough in the sunshine. Scotland and Northern Ireland, cloudier skies, increasingly so, with some showers turning to longer spells of rain for western Scotland, with some heavy outbreaks through the afternoon and into the evening. Staying bright in the east of Scotland, but increasingly cloudy. Northern Ireland likewise seeing some rain turn up by evening and temperatures of around 15 Celsius. But we've got this slice of fine weather through the Midlands, southern England, South Wales as we head into the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells across the south and southeast, but cloudier skies arrive into Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western England as well as Wales. Outbreaks of rain, mostly light and patchy in the south, but further north that rain will be heavy, accompanied by a strengthening wind. Temperatures overnight dipping to 11 or 12 Celsius. But an unsettled start for northern and western parts of the country first thing. A spell of wet weather moving south through Scotland and Northern Ireland, eventually into central and northern parts of England as well as Wales. Showers to the south of that and to the north of that, with some brighter skies in between the showers, but also a blustery wind and some particularly heavy rain and windy weather for the